Meeting is being recorded.
I can't get into our VPN. Are you in trouble? I think Matt's kicking in here. It says connecting.
I finally got it.
I have to like accept something. Okay.
All right, this is I'm going to call the meeting of the Sentencing Guidelines Commission to order. Today is Thursday, April 14th, 2021. And we are holding this as a hybrid meeting. According to state law, we provided the proper notice for both members of the commission and the public to attend virtually if they so chose. And we also have several members here in person at the on-site location. I'm going to ask Nate to go ahead and call the roll.
Roll call, Estrada. Estrada absent. Hansi.
Present.
Hansi present. Knudsen.
Present.
Knudsen present. Ladd.
Present.
Ladd present. Larkin.
Present.
Larkin present. Middlebrook.
Present.
Middlebrook present. Moore.
Present.
Moore present. Morath.
Present.
Morath present. Schnell. Schnell absent. Chair Mitchell.
Present.
Chair Mitchell present. Madam Chair, there are 8 members present, 2 members absent.
All right. So with that, we have a quorum. And the first item is to just approve the agenda. I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda. Commissioner Middlebrook makes that motion. Do we have seconds?
Second.
Is that Commissioner Moore?
Yes.
Commissioner Moore seconds. Any discussion on the agenda? Hearing none. Let's go ahead and vote on that.
To the, was it Middlebrook motion to approve the
Yes.
agenda? Estrada? Estrada absent. Hansi?
Yes.
Hansi, yes. Knudsen?
Yes.
Knudsen, yes. Ladd? Ladd, yes. Larkin?
Yes.
Larkin, yes. Middlebrook?
Yes.
Middlebrook, yes. Moore?
Yes.
Moore, yes. Morath?
Yes.
Morath, yes. Schnell? Schnell absent. Chair Mitchell?
Yes.
Chair Mitchell, yes. Madam Chair, there are 8 votes in favor, no votes opposed. And I should have said when I was calling roll, there were 8 people present, 2 people absent, and 1 seat vacant. So, but back to the agenda, 8 in favor, no opposed.
All right, great. Okay, so the reason for that vacant seat is because member Brooke Blakey had to step down. She was a member of the commission for a year. She was appointed in March of 2021. She served for a year until March of 2022. She served as our police officer representative and had to resign when she took a position with the city of St. Paul that is no longer a peace officer position. And she's here today, so we wanted to take a moment to recognize her service on the commission. And Brooke, I'd rather you tell us about your new job than me tell us about your new job, because it sounds pretty exciting.
Yes, thank you for having me, Madam Chair, and I'm excited to be here with the commission again. Sorry to no longer be a serving member. Super excited for the new position as the Director of Office of Neighborhood Safety with the City of St. Paul. This is a dream job for me as it allows me to still stay in the realm of law enforcement, but really dive deep into public and neighborhood safety, as well as just working within the community and having community engagement. The Office of Neighborhood Safety is part of Mayor's Community First Public Safety Commission and framework and dedication to the city to look at alternative responses, which is what the community asked for our response to violence and gun violence within the city. And so I'm super excited to step into that position. A lot of the work that is being done here in the commission translates, so there'll definitely still be opportunity to have conversation as we move forward and developing. And so still drinking water out of a fire hose and flying the plane as I build it. And so it's a great opportunity. I'll miss being here with this group, and I've learned a lot, and I'll be able to take some of those grains of information and utilize it in my new position. So I really appreciate you guys taking the time to recognize me in this area, and I will definitely see all of you in my paths with the City of St. Paul. Appreciate it. Thank you.
And, so during the past year, we've worked on a couple of really interesting issues since you've been here. We definitely, we're talking about, what am I trying to do? We've been talking about the custody status pointing since you were here. We've been talking about sex trafficking since you were here. I can't remember, did you get involved in the child pornography review as well?
A little bit at the very beginning, yes, at the very beginning. You guys had already pretty much wrapped it up, so I was coming in on the tail end of that information, but yes.
Definitely had a full plate. We're hoping to also pick back up on the racial disparities work in the next month or so. And so I would imagine that we will see you in our public comment section a couple of times as we move forward with our work. But officially, I'd like you to come up so we can recognize you and recognize your service on the commission. We have a certificate for the time that you served here.
Thank you very much.
And thank you very much for your time.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you very much. Thank you. You share a great name. Thank you.
Thank you, Shins. Sure.
Thank you.
I think some of you know that in my day job, I work on community corrections work. I was just talking with Brooke before this that I'm working on a project in Ramsey County that I definitely want to pull her into at the same Paul is doing similar work. So definitely not the end of our relationship, and I look forward to working with you some more. All right. Thank you so much for coming today. Well, we have a busy agenda as usual, so we're going to keep moving. The next item is approval of the draft meeting minutes from March 10th. You should have all received those a week ago. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda? I'm sorry, the minutes.
Motion to approve the minutes.
Commissioner Knutson moves to approve. Do we have a second?
Judge Larkin
Commissioner
seconds.
Middlebrook seconds. I think I missed somebody, but we got a second, so we're good. Any discussion on the minutes? Corrections or anything like that? Hearing none, let's go ahead and call the roll.
To the Knutson motion to approve the March minutes, Vice Chair Estrada absent. Hansi?
Yes.
Hansi, yes. Knutson?
Yes.
Knutson, yes. Ladd? Ladd, yes. Larkin?
Yes.
Larkin, yes. Middlebrook?
Yes.
Middlebrook, yes. Moore?
Yes.
Moore, yes. Morath?
Yes.
Morath, yes. Schnell? Schnell, absent. Chair Mitchell?
Yes.
Chair Mitchell, yes. Madam Chair, there are 8 votes in favor, none opposed.
With that, the minutes are approved unanimously. All right, the next item on the agenda is continuing our review of sex trafficking. We went over a few things last time, and one of the items that the commission was really interested in learning more about was sort of the background and rationale for the legislation that asked us to do this review, and some of the other legislation that passed to change how sex trafficking appears on the books. So we have today Oli, I'm not sure how to pronounce your last name, so Oli Tvedten. You correct that when you have a moment. Who is the chief of the criminal division, the Stearns County Attorney's Office. So Oli, I would like to turn it over to you.
Sounds like you might be Norwegian.
Is he muted?
Yeah, he is still muted. Oli, you can unmute yourself, or if not, I can unmute you.
Thank you. I think I got it there.
Yep, we can hear you fine, thanks.
All right, great. Yeah, the V is actually sounds like a W, so you nailed it, Chairperson Mitchell. I appreciate that. And yes,
Oh.
yes to the Scandinavian. So I'm really happy to be here. I'm the chief of the criminal division at the Stearns County Attorney's Office. A little bit of background. I have done human trafficking work in a prior role as assistant Stearns County attorney, meeting with victims, witnesses, survivors, and then prosecuting traffickers as well as some of the demand side. Now my role is overseeing some of this, and then we have a human trafficking task force here in central Minnesota, one of the grant-funded or partially grant-funded task forces around the state. I will go into it because I know time is limited, but if you see here on the left, kind of a summary of what we brought to the legislators. The Human Trafficking Task Force, in support of Representative Pinto, who drove this along with a lot of the other trafficking-related legislation, ended up with a bipartisan group of senators and House members to support this bill that did in fact pass. I understand part of it was a comprehensive review by this Guidelines Commission, which I'm happy you're undergoing. The larger piece of this was to clear up some issues with the statute. And as you'll see as we go through here, it's both on the demand side of trafficking and then the trafficker related side that we were specifically focused on. One of the pieces that doesn't affect this, this commission is gross misdemeanor trespass. Just by way of background, up here in Waite Park, we have an adult victim and children shelter equivalent to what many are familiar with battered women's shelters. Terebinth Refuge sits on our multidisciplinary team. And one of the things they had brought up, which goes to the demand side, is we've had victims and survivors at that residence, and we've had traffickers come by, drive by, essentially soliciting them, and Johns who are nearby. So that was one thing that was important to make that statute similar to battered women's shelters trespass statute. The other piece that we were doing was adding sex trafficking to the list of violent crimes. We have had cases where people are eligible for a dangerous offender status under the statute, but because they were committing sex trafficking as opposed to their higher level drug dealing in the past or other violent crimes in the past, weren't eligible for up to the statutory maximum sentences. That was a key and important thing for the legislatures. How could simple robbery, some assaults, or something as simple as a drug sale be listed as a violent crime, but not the trafficking of persons? And we testified related to that as well. That would only affect the Guidelines Commission to the extent that if there is a Blakely and a dangerous offenders filed in a case, we would potentially go above the book guidelines and you would see aggravated departures. Additionally, we want to explore the overall scheme of trafficking, and we'll talk about that more in detail in a moment. And then we want to look at the buyers. There was a distinction drawn in 1979 between public and private, both prostitution and traffic and sex buying. That has evolved significantly over the years. Unfortunately, the statutory language had not caught up to that evolution, and the legislature did change that, and I can go into detail on that. And then finally, both in the sex trafficking and solicitation of children to engage in sexual conduct, there were caps in the guidelines. So the presumptive range at the end of the grid with more criminal history score would not be applicable because of the statutory maximum. So we did want to increase certain statutory maximums to allow those offenders who had amassed a criminal history and did commit these offenses to be included. We knew that some of this would happen already, or by nature of what happens when a new statute gets imposed or a maximum gets raised. And I appreciate that the Guidelines Commission already did some of the work that we were essentially asking you to do in the comprehensive review. And we'll talk about two of those things that have already happened before, and some suggestions from our side, having prosecuted this and dealt with this investigative and victim side, how we think the guidelines should be tweaked. Here is one of the cases on demand specifically that had come out around the time we were working on this statute, and it was, I would call apt language. As you can see here, and we'll have these provided, Executive Director Wrights has them. As you can see here, our appellate courts were appropriately constrained by the language within the statutes as written in 1979, where the thing that the legislature then was after was getting this out of the open, making sure children and other people didn't have to see the acts of prostitution occurring. We've turned and understood what it's like to be a victim survivor of prostitution, what it's like to be in those shoes, and portions of the statutes have evolved, but not the buyer piece of it. There was a distinction where a misdemeanor previously, if you solicited prostitution and bought sex in private, and a gross misdemeanor if you bought it in public, to include hotel rooms, etc. The reality is you don't catch all people when that occurs. The buyers have evolved. Back pages before it was shut down, and then many similar sites essentially make this transaction occur before the individual does then show up. The investigators who are there then talk to that individual. Usually they come clean after a story, and within their phone are the communications about what they were going to do, what they were negotiating for, who they wanted to come, and the sex act. Well, that was deemed a misdemeanor in a Kandiyohi County case that's summarized here. And the Court of Appeals was sympathetic to the state's arguments that this is both a technologically advanced situation. This isn't people on the street only. And more importantly, we're trying to protect victim survivors from the large amount of demand that we see statewide and obviously nationally and internationally. So there are a couple good links about what the demand is, how that affects trafficking, and a couple highlights here in the appellate case law. Following that, the legislator did act. They did change that, and they adopted proposals in a very bipartisan way to say if you do commit a second act of sex buying, even of an adult or a purported adult, it will now be a felony within the last within 10 years. Currently, our guideline scheme, including the changes this body has already made, penalize trafficking and demand thusly. So your first-degree child victim of trafficking is severity level B. The statutory sentencing scheme's been raised from 15 years to 20 years maximum. Second degree, so adult victim, single adult victim, is severity level C on the sex offender grid. And then there's something called aggravated trafficking, which is one or more of 4 factors, which are outlined below. And the sentencing guideline scheme has previously adopted this as a modifier. That aggravated trafficking is actually called aggravated trafficking in the first degree, but it involves whenever any of these 4 modifiers apply and can be proven beyond a reasonable doubt as an element of the crime, whether or not the prior offense, the underlying offense was with an adult victim or a child victim, it's still called aggravated trafficking in the first degree. And as you can see, those include either a prior qualified human trafficking related offense, victim suffering bodily harm during commission of the offense, victim in debt bondage or forced labor for over 180 days, or the multiple victim sex trafficking offense. Currently, the modifier stands as is, which it is if you prove that up, it adds 48 months to the grid. So it's the bottom, the middle, and the top number all get added and adjusted by 48 months based on that aggravated factor. If you look at second degree trafficking of an adult victim and you add another victim, 48 months does match up with essentially what would be permissive consecutive sentencing or a score of 0 with an adult victim. And the one piece that I've starred there on first degree child victim trafficking is, even though at the time it was a 15-year felony, the grid at severity level B for sex offenders stops earlier or ends earlier than runs out of the statutory maximum. So the durations at the end of the grid at criminal justice courts 5 and 6 did not allow for additional sentencing. As I said, some of these, with the comprehensive review, some of these things have already happened. That is one of the things that's already happened by simply deleting that out of the appendix, and now up to 20-year maximum severity level B sentences are available. On the demand side, you have a new statute in 2021. This body ranked that at severity level 3. That is 2 offenses within 10 years, either sex trafficking and then sex buying conviction, or 2 offenses where the individual buys sex on 2 different occasions with an adult victim. That's a 5-year felony, and it was ranked at the same spot that currently sex buyers who are buying juveniles ages 16 to 17 are ranked. Those are not currently on the sex offender grid. And as you see there, as they go up in statutory maximum sentences and the ages go down, the severity level goes up. But again, those sex buyers are not on the sex offender grid currently. Currently, the solicit children to engage in sexual conduct, severity level G offense, that has taken care of an issue where you would max out earlier on in the grid, and I'll show that in a moment. But that change in the statute, increasing statutory maximum, led to a co-occurring change in the guidelines, and there's nothing additional necessarily for this body to do. There are a couple other things we'll talk about: severe violent offense list, and then currently sex buyer convictions and child solicitation are all permissive consecutive under the permissive consecutive list. When the repeat adult sex buyer statute got implemented, it did not get added to that list. That would be one of the things we'd ask to be added. So look here, and I apologize, there's a lot on that grid, but I've tried to highlight some of the things and then have this for after as people have questions or in the future as you consider this. Again, trafficking, first degree child victim, if you note, under severity level B, starts with 90, although there is that footnote number 3 already built in. The range is actually 77 months, and that goes up until 300 months. That right now for severity level B for first degree child victim would now match those two portions in yellow on criminal history score 5 and 6 were presumptive durations that were excluded previously. So an offender with a criminal history score of 5, 6, or 10 would have the same consequence as an offender with a criminal history score of 4, or could potentially. That has already happened by operation of the change to the statutory maximum, which is one of the things that we wanted and the legislator fully supported. Then if you look below that, second degree adult victims of trafficking, severity level C, they range from 48 months to 180 months. That statutory maximum has been changed. Given the way the grid sits and where severity level B is for the child victims, we're not proposing any change to severity level C. However, those maximums, as I've highlighted there, of 180 would change. They would go up to 183 with a criminal history score of 5 and 216 with a criminal history score of 6. That would not otherwise have to be edited if you adopted that. Well, you don't even have to edit it. It certainly already happened because you have a 20-year maximum. The one we are proposing to edit and change is, instead of the sentencing modifier language that adds 48 months for one or more of those 4-factor aggravated first-degree trafficking cases, is to move that offense to severity level A. That would be in line with the legislature raising the statutory maximum to 30 years. It would also be in line with, this is something above and beyond the individual trafficking, or it's something where the trafficking involves bodily harm, for example. We know from our experience that trafficking is not normally a one-time event. Most traffickers are involved in trafficking, and most victims suffer trafficking for multiple events, sometimes aggregated over months and months. And often that involves violence, both either by the Johns and or by the trafficker themselves. When that happens along with sexual acts, it seems appropriate that that would be treated as the force and coercion sexual penetration statutes are. And you would again have that change, as I've noted here in light blue, I guess, where you would need to add a 4th footnote if you did decide to go that way. That would change the criminal history score of 0 aggravated sex trafficking offender from 122 months up to 172 months. It would also max out at 360 months, which is currently the severity level A maximum. And then we would propose adding sex trafficking in all its forms to the severe violent offense list. As you can see, those are citations listed below. Labor trafficking is on that. Criminal sexual conduct in the 1st or 2nd degree in most circumstances are on that list. And that would be another area where we would propose an additional sex trafficking. And I could certainly refer back to this, but otherwise I'll cruise through it and then answer questions. For demand, I've left the yellow there, but the green is what The green on the right, on the bottom, severity level G, is what child solicitation already is at. And by the changes made to the statutory maximum, now opened up accountability for people who commit that with higher criminal history scores. What used to happen is anyone with a score of 3 and under was a presumptive stay at the ranges up to 30 months. And then the range for anyone with more than a score of criminal history score of 3 was 34 to 36 months, no matter how much you had additionally, despite the guidelines normally saying on severity level G offenses, you go up to the 60 months. Now with the 60-month statutory maximum, it does line up with level G, and that should be already accomplished without any additional changes. I do note Appendix 3 was already deleted. The reference therein was already deleted out of Appendix 3, so that's been taken care of. And then one of our bigger pushes is, as I said, adding repeat adult sex offenders to the permissive consecutive list. I proposed where we would rank them based on talking to our investigators and prosecutors and victim personnel. And we have ranked them at buyers 16 to 17 or the new felony of 2 and 10 years at severity level G. That was consistent with where they're ranked at severity level 3 currently, but moved on to the sex offender grid. Buyers of juveniles 15 to 16 would move from severity level 5 to severity level F. That would allow the 10-year current statutory maximum to be potentially implicated if an offender has a longer criminal history. And then from severity level 9, where buying sex from juvenile victims under 14 is currently ranked, to severity level B. As I note, there is a minimal initial difference. So when we talk about people who have no criminal history, who have not been involved in any of this before, although they commit a heinous crime, from our perspective, they are still looking at about the same sentence at severity level B than they would be at severity level 9. It is, of course, already classified as a presumptive commit and pretty high. Our bigger push for moving sex buyers to the sex offender grid involves the rationality of why they're on a sex offender grid, what crimes they are like, what's happening to these individuals, what's happening to both youth and adults who are victim survivors of sex acts for money. And then what we've found from litigation on these cases, we've had multiple cases where repeat buyers who were previously only charged with gross misdemeanors, no matter how many times they bought adult sex, and then other buyers of juveniles, defense has argued that, well, they're classified by the guidelines not even on the sex offender grid. They shouldn't have a psychosexual. They shouldn't have certain terms because they're decided that these are not sex offenses. Clearly, they, from our perspective, they are driven by demand for sex from mostly men of both juvenile males and females, as well as adult males and females. And that purchasing power and something about that suggests to us that this is definitely a sex offense. We're not asking for registration. We're not asking for additional pieces to it and didn't ask the legislature for that. But we do think it'd be more appropriate to be on the sex offender grid. That would open up additional consequences for certain offenses. They are not dramatically different. And if it's a low-level criminal history and the buyer is a repeat felony buyer but doesn't have the criminal history, it's still a presumptive presumptive state sentence. And then finally, for those repeat adult sex buyers, we did ask that they be added to the permissive consecutive list, or we are asking. It just seems to make sense. I could talk briefly about the repeat sex buyers. Anyone that's been convicted has a penalty assessment, a significant consequence. There's some supposed deterrent effects, the shame. Many of these people don't have criminal histories. They are, often stepping outside their marriage, committing adultery. They have children, and yet we are still seeing the same individuals coming back. They have all done an 8-hour class, at least in our jurisdiction. We know in the other jurisdictions, at least an 8-hour class, whether that's Breaking Free, the Central Minnesota Sexual Assault Center, other places that offer these classes. And they spend 8 hours with victim survivors, with investigators, with sexual assault advocates, talking about what it's like for the victim, that they are seeing more as a dollar figure, what it's like for them to go through it. And yet after that class, they are coming back. And so for that, those types of offenses, even when we have adult victims, we do want to see some sort of psychosexual evaluation. We want to see this treated as something is going on here, that you continue to violate the statute despite all the supposed deterrent effects of the initial violation. So in general, and I'm happy to answer questions, but we want to treat trafficking consistent with comparable offenses, treat demand consistent with other felony sex offenses, and facilitate clear guidance for litigants in making it clear that these are all sex offender grid statutes, and where they're ranked on the statute is proportionate to other types of offenses in that area. So I have nothing further other than answers for any questions, and thanks for listening.
All right, thank you very much. Do we have questions from the commission? Commissioner Middlebrook.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question on one of your slide where you're showing the grid. I couldn't read the bottom language about the aggravating factor. Can you just go through that? I'm just a little bit confused on that.
Absolutely. So currently severity level B, footnote 3 to that grid says, although normally on severity level B, everything's a mandatory minimum of 90 months. And so the grid share starts at 90 and the middle of the grid is 90. The same thing would have to happen with severity level A if you moved it, because there's no mandatory minimum for aggravated sex trafficking. So all that footnote is noting the 15% and then calculating out the 15% below. So you'd have the grid range both for A and B related to sex trafficking.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Other comments or questions? Commissioner Knudsen?
So, Mr. Tvedten, so these are the recommendations from the Stearns County Attorney's Office for where they would be placed on the grid?
Correct. From talking to our human trafficking task force, which includes investigators in the Stearns County Attorney's Office. That's correct.
Have you run this by the County Attorneys Association or the Board of Public Defense, or
We
get
have not.
feedback?
So we reached out with Representative Pinto when we were processing these. We're processing the statute, including the other task forces. And so the task forces were on board when they asked for the statute. This is just responding to requests for information on how you would look at the comprehensive scheme. And we can certainly run them by and present that from a broader group. It may make sense to present it from the group with the task forces, because each of those task forces, quite frankly, is finding the most of this through the investigations, most of these types of offenses.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments? One thing I want to ask is, on the demand side, if we were to consider moving those offenses over to the sex offender grid, I mean, one of the things you said is that you want to be able to get psychosexual evaluations for some of these folks. I assume you're talking about the repeat offenders, not first-time offenders. But how would the way we rank the offense affect that? It just doesn't seem to me like there's a connection there.
So it's not a mandatory piece, and we argue there's no connection there either. Our counterparts across the aisle repeatedly argue, well, there is. See, there's a sex offender list, and this isn't on it. And so that's just, I guess, an ancillary result of what we're going to argue. As to your other point about, is this repeat? Yes, because the initial individuals who attempt to buy sex from an adult and run into an investigator are charged with a gross misdemeanor, and they're never on the grid, so they're not part of this commission's work.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
Any other questions or comments? All right, this has been really helpful. Thank you so much. It's actually really helpful to sort of hear from you what you consider to have already been accomplished by the commission, and then what the difference is between that and where you're interested in seeing the commission going. It also helps focus our attention a little bit more on maybe certain areas we don't need to look at. So I appreciate you coming today. Unless there's any other questions, I think, oh, Commissioner Knudsen?
Madam Chair, do we have access then to that slide presentation?
I'll let Nate answer that.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Knudsen, thank you. Yes, Oli emailed it to me before today's meeting, so that will be posted. I could email that out beforehand, but for members of the public, that'll be posted on our website. I'm going to commit to Tuesday because of vacation things. Maybe we could do it tomorrow, but it'll certainly be on our website by Tuesday. I could email that out to the commission actually right now.
Well, I don't need it right now.
Okay, all right.
So we
I just want to
see
make
it.
sure we
Yeah.
got access to it so that we can absorb all that information that we just presented.
Yeah,
Try to sort through it.
right. I agree. I would like to spend a little time sitting with it and looking it over more carefully. But it's really good to help us focus on some of those questions. So I appreciate you bringing that to us today.
Thank you.
All right. All right, with that, then I think we'll move on to the next part. And the staff, we had some questions last week and staff has been working on trying to answer those for us. So I'll turn that over to Nate to go through.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wonder if I have to make myself the presenter. I do. Okay. Just while I'm getting set up, a couple of announcements. One is thanks to Commissioner Schnell's hospitality. We have a hot coffee over there on the counter if you'd like to grab some. I'm sorry, that doesn't apply to those who are beaming in remotely.
We deliver.
All right, so this is the
Oh,
information.
that's custody status, not
Custody
sex
status.
trafficking.
Wrong one. All right, so this is the information paper that we submitted in answer to sex trafficking questions. I will say one of the questions that we're answering here wasn't maybe raised during the meeting, but it's something that came up in discussion with the chair in between meetings. So the first one has to do with aggravated sex trafficking. What would it look like if we were to enhance the rankings of aggravated sex trafficking? Now, I will say that the guidelines perhaps take a different tack than the one presented by Mr. Tvedten, which was to essentially distinguish first degree and second degree aggravated sex trafficking. I do see Mr. Tvedten's argument in the statute. It's no offense to the legislature, somewhat clumsily drafted statute. It's got first degree. The title doesn't say aggravated anything. It just says first degree and then second degree. And then there's one parens A in first degree. And then there's one parens B under the first degree heading, true, is the part that lists out the aggravating factors. It gives the enhanced penalty and it applies it both to one parens A, which is first degree, and then one B, which is second degree. I'm sorry, 1A. It is 1A, isn't it? So it's 1A and one parens A. So it's very confusing, but it applies to both of them. So I'm going to refer to these as aggravated first degree and aggravated second degree. I'm not going to say I'm right and Mr. Tvedten's wrong. I'm just going to say that's sort of consistent with how the guidelines treat it, because the guidelines, as Mr. Tvedten said, treat this as a modifier to the underlying first or second degree. So essentially it's aggravating the first degree or aggravating the second degree. So it's a 48-month modifier. So this table 1 here shows what would happen if the commission were to change the rankings here. So getting rid of it as a modifier, the 48-month modifier, instead of making it an offense that's simply ranked. The proposal that's suggested by Mr. Tvedten is, and by the way, to Commissioner Knudsen's point here, this is not intended to be like a broad survey of stakeholders here. The intent in inviting Mr. Tvedten is Mr. Tvedten was on the team that was the proponent of the statute that created the mandate for the comprehensive review that we're doing now. So So our intent in inviting Mr. Tvedten was to find out what was going on there. What was the intent of the proponents of this statute in making us do this review, essentially. And I think we learned a lot from Mr. Tvedten's proposal. That's not to say that we shouldn't talk to the County Attorneys Association or the Board of Public Defender, or the public defender, state public defender, and so forth. So I didn't mean to imply that this is in any way intended to be like some kind of balanced presentation. I was just trying to get the idea of what was the proponent's intent here in doing that.
Commissioner Knutson?
Hey, I think I'm understanding it much better now. But that's their perspective from their task force and how they developed the legislation and what they came forth with, and their kind of the way they see the scheme playing out with all the changes that were made apparently, right? And yeah, I guess then we have the option and the obligation then to go ahead and rank it. But now we've got the benefit of their input on all of it, and then we'll just go forward with our hearings and
Right.
decision-making process. Okay, that makes sense.
And to be clear, the statute does not require any changes to the sentencing guidelines. The statute simply requires that the commission comprehensively review and consider modifying how the guidelines treat these offenses. I should also say, technically, the statute doesn't talk about the demand side. It only talks about the sex trafficking statute, but I think the commission has already discussed the fact that maybe it would be interested in looking at some of the demand side issues that Mr. Tvedten brought up. But that's really more of a technical point. So, all right, so back to table 1 here. So the presumptive duration under the current policy statute essentially looks at what these offenses are, what the presumptive durations would be. All of them are presumptive commits, but what the presumptive durations would be under the current policy. So that's taking the grid time for severity level B or severity level C and adding 48 months to the grid time. And then if re-ranked at severity level A assumes that we get rid of the modifier and re-rank these offenses at severity level A, which is what Mr. Tvedten was just proposing. And you can see that for at some criminal history scores, that's actually lower duration. So the higher duration is highlighted in blue there. So at criminal history scores of 1 through 4, the higher duration is actually under the current policy. It's only at criminal history scores of 0, 5, and 6. And we're talking about center of the box here, but which is to say the presumptive duration, not looking at the ranges. But the presumptive duration is higher if re-ranked at severity level A. Now, if the base offense is a second degree offense, which is now ranked at severity level C, it's always going to be higher at all criminal histories. It would be higher to rank it at severity level A, which again, as I say, is what Mr. Tvedten was proposing. Now, this third column here, if re-ranked at severity level B, was not proposed, but that's another course of action the commission might consider. If the commission were to rank it at severity level C, re-rank the severity level C offense at severity level B if the aggravating factors were present, then those durations would also be higher at most, but not all criminal history scores. At criminal history scores 2 through 6, and that's highlighted in green, they would be higher if re-ranked at severity level B. Otherwise, at 0 and 1, that they are higher under the current policy. The other thing that the chair asked us to look at is just to sort of give an overview of modifiers in the sentencing guidelines. Like when does the sentencing guidelines use modifiers? So table 2 is sort of a quick survey of the sentencing guidelines modifiers. There are a number of modifiers that take the presumptive sentence and slash it in half. That's attempt, conspiracy, solicitation of juveniles or mentally impaired persons, taking responsibility for criminal acts. So you take what the underlying offense is and divide the duration in half. There are a couple that increase it by 50%. Offenses, and I should say, in all 3 of those cases, it's important to point out that's what the statute does. The statute, it doesn't do that to presumptive sentence, but it does that to the statutory maximum penalty. which is typically what statutes are talking about. It's the statutory maximum penalty. It divides those in half. Commission essentially follows suit by dividing the presumptive sentence in half as well. Likewise, with offenses committed in furtherance of terrorism, it's an increase of 50%, and the commission increases the duration by 50%. So line up there. And then I've got in bold here prior DWI, because that's a little bit different. And I'll, spoiler alert, it's also a little bit different for aggravated sex trafficking as well, which is what we're talking about here. So the legislature takes a 10-year statutory maximum offense and turns it into a 15-year statutory maximum offense. If somebody essentially kills somebody while committing a DWI and had a prior DWI conviction on the record, then that goes from a 10-year stat max offense to a 15-year stat max offense. The commission could have just ranked that as a more severe offense than, say, severity level 7, or no, I'm sorry, severity level 8, severity level 8. But instead of doing that, it just said, okay, we're going to increase the presumptive duration by 15%. Now, 50%. A 50% increase is mathematically equal to what a 10-year becoming 15-year change is equal to. But unlike some of these other ones, the legislature didn't just say whatever the offense is, we're increasing it by 50%. So that's a little bit of a deviation from most of these modifiers. Criminal sexual predatory conduct is a 25% increase, which is identical to what the criminal sexual predatory conduct does to the stat max. So again, we're kind of back in that pattern of following the statute. Assault motivated by bias, whatever the assault is increased by 25% stat max. That's what the sentencing guidelines modifier does as well. So now we come to aggravated sex trafficking. What we're talking about here, that is a 48-month increase, and the statute, as we've explored, takes either a 20 or a 25-year statutory maximum and turns it into a 30-year statutory maximum. So the commission, that's again a little bit unusual, but consistent with sort of what happens here with prior DWI, is that 48-month increase rather than what the legislature is doing with the stat max. And you know what, I will say one thing that does is it does distinguish between whether the base offense was a second degree offense involving an adult victim or a first degree offense involving a child victim, which the stat maximum does not distinguish. All right, and then we go to, Shauna, can you come here? So then we go to crime for benefit of the gang. I highlighted the mandatory prison commit because that's the only dispositional change that is made by these modifiers. And then all right, so but there's the 24-month increase. So this is a little bit different too. So crime for the benefit of gang is a 24-month increase if the victim is a child. It's a 10-year statutory maximum increase, and a 12-month increase if the victim is an adult, and that's a 5-year statutory maximum increase. So it is similar to the other modifiers in the sense that it's not a defined duration, not a defined mandatory statutory maximum, but it's based on what the underlying offense is. So in a sense, the crime for the benefit of the gang is like the other modifiers. And then second or subsequent severe violent offense, this is different because it isn't based in statute. That's an increase of 12 months if there's one prior severe violent offense, 18 months if there are 2 priors, or 24 months if there are 3 or more priors. So that's an overview of those, and we're going to ask Anne if she would please lead us through the rest of the departure rates and reasons for departure. And Anne, if you could go as quickly as possible, that'd be great.
everyone. Just a brief summary of the departure rates. What we have are 5-year departure rates, persons sentenced between 2015 and 2019. Okay, and at 32%, the total sex trafficking mitigated dispositional departure rate. So that's people. All of these cases are presumptive prison. So these are cases that didn't get prison. 32% mitigated dispositional departure rate was lower than the rate for cases generally, and lower than the rate for other prostitution cases, but higher than the rate for other offenses on the sex offender grid, except for failure to register. The mitigated dispositional departure rate for all cases during this time period was 37%. For other cases, on the sex offender grid, it was 27%. For prostitution offenses, it was 57%. But the mitigated dispositional departure rate for the aggravated sex trafficking cases was 23%. So it's lower there than for any of the other groups of cases we've looked at. When we turn to mitigated durations for prison cases, for all sex trafficking overall, it was 39%. For the aggravated sex trafficking, it was 20%. So the mitigated departure rate overall for sex trafficking is mitigated durational departure rate at 39% for sex trafficking cases is higher than for other crimes on the sex offender grid, higher than for all cases where it was 23%. But again, the mitigated durational departure rate at 20 for the aggravated cases at 20% was lower than the other rates. And the departure reasons cited are similar to the departure reasons cited for other cases. Most frequently cited reasons for mitigated dispositional departures: amenable to probation and amenable to treatment. The prosecutor agreed to or does not object to the departure or recommended the departure in 64% of the mitigated dispositions. For the mitigated durations, most frequently cited reasons are crime less onerous, shows remorse, accepts responsibility. Prosecutor agreed to, recommended, or did not object to 84% of the mitigated durations. Prosecutor objected to 11% of the mitigated durations for the sex trafficking cases. That's all I was going to say.
All right, I think we have a lot on our agenda today, so I don't want to go through the next section line by line. Because there are so few aggravated sex trafficking cases, the staff had the ability to go through and look at them individually so that we could see more information about what was in them. And you've all had this document, so I think you've had time to take a look at it. I think the question is that I would like to open up to the commission is, what do we need to do next? I'm sort of percolating on the presentation that we had today, and some of the information that we've been provided in our packet today. Because to me, it seems like the real question before us is whether we need to consider treating the aggravated version of this offense differently than we already do under the guidelines, which is the 48-month modifier. It seems as if the rankings that we made last year are in line with expectations. And the real question is, how do we deal with the more aggravated form of these offenses? So I see that as a potential topic for discussion. And then there's also the proposal to potentially add some of these offenses to the severe violent offender list, which we also need to talk about. And then there's the sort of the other question of whether any of the prostitution offenses should be moved to the sex offender grid. So I'm trying to figure out, how do we process this information and sort of move forward. Does anybody have some sort of reactions today or thoughts that they want to put on the table for where we should go next, or how we should go about processing this information?
Madam Chair,
Commissioner Knudsen.
just my first blush response to the aggravating, whether we treat it aggravating, I think it would be helpful for staff to tell us what's the common way we've dealt with aggravating issues before? How have we ranked them? How have we put them on the in the guidelines? Why do we think the task force looks at this differently? And what are they proposing? How would it look if we adopted theirs versus doing it in an aggravated manner?
I mean, those were exactly the reactions that I had too. And that's what some of the information that staff brought to us today is about, right? So they gave us the sort of table on how the sentences could change if it was re-ranked versus if we keep it at the 48-month enhancement. And then the other table, like I had the same exact question. I was like, well, how do we deal with these aggravated situations? And what I'm gathering from the table that we received today is that usually the statute drives how we do it. So if the statute says, cut it in half or double it, then we do the same thing. This is different because in this case, what the legislature has done is they've changed the stat max instead of giving a direction of like how much to increase the sentence. And the only other time they've done that, according to Nate, is DWI. And so we responded to DWI in the same way that we responded with all the other aggravators by giving it a proportionate increase. And the question, and it seems like we did that with this statute originally when it was originally ranked and we originally created the 48-month modifier. So the question is, why would we change today? Like, is there a good rationale for changing that approach? I mean, that's sort of what I keep coming back to. I'm not sure how to parse through that. Nate?
Madam Chair, I may not have been clear. I think what's anomalous about the DWI and the sex trafficking in the modifiers is that they are treated as modifiers. I mean, there are, and I'm not advocating for anything. I'm just pointing out it is unusual. Typically, if there's a difference in the statutory max, typically the legislature makes distinctions between offenses. They sort of communicate their distinctions both in the title of the offense, first degree, second degree, aggravated, whatnot, and in the statutory maximum that they assign to it. So, for example, simple robbery has a lower statutory maximum than second degree aggravated robbery, which has a lower statutory maximum than first degree aggravated robbery. And the commission, I would say sort of the normal response that the commission has historically taken to that, which it did in robbery, is it ranks simple robbery below second degree aggravated robbery below first degree aggravated robbery. So, I mean, what Mr. Tvedten is proposing is, I would say, sort of the conventional approach, to just rank the offense with a higher stat max higher than the offenses with a lower stat max. And I don't know exactly why the commission did it the way it did. I can think of one reason why it may have done it that way, and that is to preserve the distinction between second degree and first degree. Because if you just took it by the stat max, then you'd be treating all aggravated cases the same. But then again, Mr. Tvedten makes the argument, well, the legislature treated them all the same. He's calling them all first degree aggravated sex trafficking. So it doesn't matter what the age of the victim is if one of these aggravating circumstances is involved. So that's a point for the commission to consider, I think. But yeah, the norm isn't. I didn't mean to suggest that those are the only times the legislature made that sort of distinction. I was simply trying to say that those are the only times the legislature responded, or the commission responded to those legislative distinctions through a modifier as opposed to through a differential ranking.
Yeah, that makes sense. That was a good explanation. Thank you. Other thoughts, comments? You guys are going to leave it all up to me to figure out the next agenda, aren't you?
No, but,
Commissioner Knudsen.
somehow we're gonna have to go through each one of these. I'd like to, now that we've got this, we'll have the PowerPoint and further detailed explanation. Can we compare what they're recommending and what their thoughts were with what the materials that we had prepared for today's meeting? And kind of be able to look at each issue as we go.
Madam Chair,
Right.
Commissioner Knudsen, that was sort of what we were trying to do in table one in these materials, was to present what it would look like as far as that middle column, the if re-ranked at severity level A, is essentially capturing that. This is what would happen to the presumptive sentences. It would actually get lighter for several. The presumptive sentence would be lower for several at several severity levels. I'm sorry, at several criminal histories if it was re-ranked at severity level A, but it would be higher for all if second degree aggravated were ranked at severity level A. So I mean that I think answers that question. If it doesn't, I'd like to know what more you're looking for.
Okay, then I'm confused, because I thought this was the first time we've seen their recommendations. It's not.
No, it is.
What is? Okay, that's what I want to know. So how does their recommendation differ than what we've presented, or we will presented from the staff this time? And compare and contrast, where are they, how is it different from how we envision the statutory language changes, how we interpret the statutory language changes?
Okay. So, I mean, I do think that you have a point that we don't have all the information in front of us, just because there's really three distinct issues here. And we have pieces of information that respond to each one of those. So we probably could put it in that form where we look at sort of the issue of how to rank the aggravated sentence, the issue of whether prostitution crimes should be moved to the sex grid, the severe violent offender list issue. Those are three distinct issues, and we don't have those all represented here. So I think we could try to put it in that order and work through it in that way. I think we are trying to think of it all at one time. In terms of the aggravated sentence, I do think we have all the information in this document, but we don't need to decide on it today. I think we need to think about it a little bit more. But what Nate is saying is that which table is it?
I can
Well, table one.
Table one is showing right now we have a policy that adds a 48-month modifier to the presumptive sentence if a person if the aggravating factors are met. And so table one, the first column next to the criminal history score, shows what the sentence would be under our current policy. And then the second two columns show how the sentence would be different if the offenses were ranked at severity level A. So the first one is if you move them both to A, and then the second column is, well, if you just move second degree to B, because that'd be one severity level higher. And so that's showing that our current policy for first degree actually does result in longer sentences for people who have this meet these aggravating factors. But in the second degree, it would be shorter than if we moved it up to, our current policy has shorter sentences than if we moved it up to A or B. So it's kind of different in that way. Commissioner Middlebrook?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have a question. With table A, where we're looking at the 48 months versus re-ranking at severity level A, if we went to the top of the box and added the 48 months, I don't have the grid in front of me, but I was curious if that would get us, I mean, if that would change that chart a little bit.
Mhm. Yeah, we didn't look at the ranges, so
And I figured this was the middle of the box.
it is.
So I was curious about that. Obviously I can compare it, but I didn't have the grid in front of me, so.
Yeah,
We
and
can certainly do that.
And I can't remember, does the later table give us the durations? Like that were actually imposed?
Yeah, right. This, so table 1 is just the grid time.
Yep, right.
It's not cases. Table, yeah, get down there. Table 3 and table 4 are talking about the mitigated dispositions, and then yeah, I don't think we actually have what the durations were, just whether they were departures.
Down in for the aggravated ones, you have
Well,
the actuals, but not.
Yes, for the aggravated ones, we have all case details.
Yeah, right. Because I think that as we continue to consider this, we also want to always keep in mind what the current departure rate is as well, because, sort of like you push it too far in one direction, then you're just going to get a backlash with departures anyway. So did you do anything? But so looking at if it's the top, so are you saying, when you're saying from the top of the box, are you saying like maybe another way to think about it is to have people start at the top of the box before the 48 months are added?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I was curious because at the middle of the box, it seemed that if we went to the top of the box on all of them, we would get there. If that's one option, and keeping the modifier. I mean, when you look at it, there's only 10. There's only 10 cases. 11, I guess, right? 10 that were the aggravated in the first degree and second degree that were prison commits. There's only 10 cases. It's not a whole lot of aggravated offenses in these numbers.
Yeah, right. It was really a small number of cases. Okay. All right. All right. So let's think about this some more. Bring it back next time. I think next time we'll want to try to focus on the distinct issues that really have been laid before us in terms of what we've been asked to consider. And we'll break it down into those 3 issues of, how do we deal with the aggravating form of this offense, whether or not we should be considering adding these offenses to the severe violent offender list, and then whether or not we should be considering moving some of these prostitution offenses over to the sex offender grid. Commissioner Middlebrook.
Thank you, Madam Chair. One more question on those cases on the prostitution that the county attorney was talking about with the demand. Do we have a breakdown on those cases?
I think we did in our first presentation.
The very first one?
On the prostitution offenses?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do we have a breakdown on those?
I don't know. I mean, we weren't focusing on that for this presentation, but we
Yeah.
can certainly break those down.
If we're going to discuss it, I think we need to have some information on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. All right. Okay, we're going to move on to the custody status section. And this month, the legislative items are really timely and important for us to get to. So I would really like to limit the time that we spend on custody status today. So Nate, let's go quickly through the information that you have, and then we'll move on to the legislative issues.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So looking at 6A1, I'm just going to go pretty quickly through this. So what we have here with Table 1, just to explain it, is we're taking only prison cases. So it's
Are you putting it up right now?
I could put it up.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So we're looking at only prison cases. So that's the universe of cases. And we break down by severity level, quite a bit of detail, how many cases there were, what the average duration was. And And then we talk about what the impact of custody status was. So how many of those cases were commits because of custody status, would not have been commits, presumptive commits without custody status. And then we look at the durational impact among those cases that would have been prison commits without custody status, with or without custody status, they would have been going to prison anyway. What was the duration? How much prison time was attributable to the custody status? And I'm just going to jump down to the bottom line due to time. So we have in this, it's a 5-year period. No, it's a 1-year period, 2019. So in 2019, we had 2,510 prison commits. So 2,510 people were sentenced to prison in 2019, which is almost 41% of all cases sentenced that year. Of those, 401, which is about 16%, so 401, 16% of the people who were sentenced to prison that year, you could attribute that prison commit due to the fact that that person had custody status.
So they crossed the dispositional line.
Well, yes, you would think so, although this, Ann did quite a bit of work on this. So some people demanded execution. So everybody has a right to demand execution of their prison sentence. So some people, if the people were below the dispositional line and they demanded execution and went to prison anyway, this isn't, or I suppose if it was an aggravated dispositional departure, it doesn't count these. So this is people who crossed the dispositional line because of the custody status point. So that was 16% of those prison cases. And then taking everybody else, the people who would have gone to prison with or without the custody status point, how much extra prison time was attributable to the custody status point, and that was 3.3 months, averaging everybody all together. So that's 6A1 in a nutshell. Unless there are any questions on that, we will jump to 6A2, which Jill will be presenting.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Okay, well, this paper was intended to answer some of those questions the Commission had about the custody status waiver. And the bottom line, because we're short on time, is that the waiver is used seldomly. The policy, just as a reminder, is it went into effect in August of 2019. It says that the court may waive the custody status point or half point as long as it's consistent with public safety, and that neither the current offense nor the custody status offense is a sex offense, a severity level 8 or D8 offense or higher, or on the severe violent offenses. The entire policy is in the paper, at the end of the paper, but I'll highlight the data summary, which is at the bottom of page 1. There were 11,517 cases that were sentenced in 2020, but many were excluded because of their date of offense was before August of 2019, or because the current offense made it ineligible. 5,304 cases remained, and 47.5%, or 2,519 cases, were not on any type of custody status, for example, not on probation, not on supervised release. Therefore, they would not get a point or half point. What was left was 2,785 cases that we called potentially CSP waiver eligible. And in table 1, we see that of the waiver eligible cases, 47.9% were assigned a half point and 52.1% were assigned 1 point. And this table includes those cases that were eventually waived. Table 2 shows that there were no waivers in 99.4% of the cases. So that left 16 cases where there was a waiver. Table 3 shows the offense type that those were.
We had 4 that were person offenses, 3 property, 5 drug, 1 felony DWI, and 3 were of those other categories. And then table 4 I won't go into, but that essentially summarizes all of those 16 cases and shows the demographic information, some information on the current conviction, the custody status type, criminal history score, and the presumptive sentence before and after the waiver, and then the sentence that they received.
Excellent.
If there are any questions, I'm happy to try to answer those.
Any comments or questions from commission members on either of those 2 documents?
It's helpful. It's very helpful.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I thought it was helpful too. I mean, really good work, guys, because it provides a much clearer picture of the sort of impacts of custody status, who's getting it, how much it's impacting their sentence. That really helps me. And then, I mean, I think the waiver might be a little low, probably because it was the first year, and maybe if the pandemic hadn't happened, we would also see those numbers go up. But everything about 2020 was weird, so who knows what that even is going to show.
It's hard to say, Madam Chair. I mean, you do notice that a lot of the waivers, it's a very small sample, are bringing somebody back to the left side of the dispositional line, which makes sense. That's kind of what we predicted when we were talking with the commission about making the waiver policies. We expect this will be mostly used to get back to the other side of the dispositional line. They're not all like that. Then, Madam Chair, if I could just briefly talk about the Beganovich case
Sure.
quickly. So on, I think it was Monday, the Court of Appeals decided the Beganovich case, which had to do with this half custody status point policy that the commission's been wrestling with for lo these many months. And what was unique about Beganovich is it's a published case, which means it's actually precedential and binding. Well, I guess it's called precedential now. It's not called published, but it's a binding precedent, and it adopted the Eubanks decision, which the commission based its interim guidance on the January interim guidance. And I guess to be more precise, it adopted the commission's interim guidance. So it adopted the reasoning of the commission's interim guidance, which, I'm not giving a legal opinion here, but my first impression of this is that essentially it's making the commission's interim guidance permanent, which isn't to say it can't be changed. But one might suppose that to change the commission's interim guidance now, that it wouldn't be sufficient to just take a vote at a meeting. It would actually the commission would have to change the sentencing guidelines. So I think we're sort of, and again, I'm not trying to give a legal opinion here on the fly, but it's quite possible that we're now locked in to the commission's interim guidance pending a sentencing guidelines change. So that's all we had on 6A, Madam Chair. So it's to you now to talk about roundtable planning.
All right, so again, this will be short. I've made it very clear that my goal is to not hang our hat on an appellate court decision and to actually put some language in the guidelines that says one way or the other, how custody status works. So I do want us to, either codify the change that we made or create a different scheme, at some point. But we've sort of reached the point where we've done kind of almost all the analysis we can do, open to any other analysis that anybody wants to put forward. And it's time to start thinking about what those potential solutions are. And as Commissioner Rationale said when he made his motion to sort of delay our decision, we should get input on that process. And so looking at how the commission has done that in the past, there's sort of 2 main ways the commission has worked to gain input on policy. One of them is what we have been through, which is a public hearing, where people come and react to something that we put on the table. The other option is to have a more interactive process where people come and join us at the table and talk to us more openly and fluidly about how we could craft a solution. We've done that a couple of times. We did that in the past, we did that when we were looking at the first round, the first time that the commission, well, it's not the first time, the drug law issue went back and forth between the legislature and the commission like 62 times. One of those times, the commission invited people in for a roundtable, and we had a discussion with other stakeholders about possibilities. Another issue that the commission has done this for was how to handle plea agreements as reasons for departures. So that's what I'd like to do. I'd like to have a roundtable, bring in stakeholders to join us at the table to help us craft a potential solution going forward. I'm looking at July 28th for a potential roundtable. It's far enough out that we could actually invite legislators to sit at the table with us. It would be past their session, and so that we could have their engagement. Because I think that some of the dynamic with the commission in the past couple of years is that discussions happen here, discussions happen at the legislature, but the two don't come together. And I think that would be a good cross-pollination of ideas. July 28th is a scheduled meeting for us already. It is the day that we come back after our public hearing in July. We have a meeting a week later to adopt the formal changes. So a quorum is already required for that meeting. Hopefully you all still have it on your schedule. But we might adjust the length of that meeting. But right now it is a regularly scheduled meeting date. Am I getting the date wrong?
No, that's correct,
right?
Madam Chair.
Okay. And so my goal would be that next month we'd spend a little bit of commission time planning the roundtable, talking about sort of how we want to go, what we want to bring to the table. That we would also craft, as a commission, we'd craft an invitation to stakeholders and spend some time talking about who the right people are to have at the table. So these will be the things that we'll cover between now and over the next 2 months, and then we'll put those invites out and we'll hold the roundtable. I'm also, I think that we probably need an outside facilitator as well. I don't want to chair that meeting. I think it'd be better if we had, in the past when we've had roundtables, we've had somebody else sort of help lead the discussion so that all of us could be active participants in that discussion, and no particular viewpoints would be dominating the discussion either. So I just wanted to set that forward as our path. And any questions or any comments or anything? All right, great. All right, we've made up some time. So you can have a little bit of time here for your next two issues, which are meaty. I'm going to hand it over to Nate for the demographic impact statements. If you want to do the legislative piece first, I'm also fine with that. The demographic impact statement could be pushed to next month if you want the time.
Madam Chair, yeah, so that's not a bad idea. So actually there's two parts of the demographic impact statement presentation. One is to sort of submit to you the 5 demographic impact statements that we've done so far this session. There's a possibility of one more. I thought it was dead, so I've sort of been slow walking it. It has to do with child pornography. I'm not sure why it was sent to us as a fiscal note, because it was never given a hearing in any committee on child pornography, but I've been hearing whisperings about it, and I'm not, it is the season of resurrection after all, and even though it's missed all committee deadlines, I'm not sure if it is really dead. So I may be looking at that a little more closely, but I think these are the 5 demographic impact statements with that possible exception that we can do. I will just comment on the first one. This is a 6911 bill that is not in any omnibus bill. This is a version of the bill that I think was authored by Senator Gazelka, and it had a bit higher of a prison bed impact than the other versions. So that's the 781, Senate File 2576. The Senate File 2673 is in an omnibus bill with a slightly different form, so it's got a slightly different prison bed impact. But I can, unless anybody has an objection, so under the policy, these I think the policy says these become final after the commission meeting if the commission doesn't vote to repeal them or change them or something. So essentially, this is your chance to give any input on that if you want. Addressing the policy itself, which is 7B on your agenda, We could certainly table that. It's not as time sensitive as the legislative issues. So if you want me to jump to the legislative issues, I have no idea how much discussion or not discussion there will be on those.
Let's take them out of order, just because I think that 7B will go quickly, but it would be easy to move to next month if we end up having a lot of discussion on number 8. So we'll come back to it if we have time. How's that?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So looking at the items for agenda item number 8. So 8A, I have your charter statute. So why am I presenting this legislative stuff to you, other than the fact that I really, really enjoy it? Well, there's basically 2 reasons. One is you have you have a mandate to give the legislature recommendations from time to time regarding changes to the criminal code, criminal procedure, and other aspects of sentencing. So, how frequently time to time is entirely up to the commission, but this is something the legislature created you to do, is give them recommendations regarding changes in criminal law, criminal procedure, and other aspects of sentencing. The second reason why I'm bringing this up to you is this is going to be on the test. So in June, we're going to have a meeting, and it's a fairly intense meeting if the legislature passed, well, assuming the legislature gets done on time. It could involve a lot of changes to criminal law, and you're going to be asked to make changes to the sentencing guidelines in essentially one meeting based on those changes to the criminal law. So I'm hoping by presenting this information to you today, that it will at least give you some familiarity, so it will not be the first time you've thought about these issues when you see them in June.
Can I add a third reason?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Before you go. The other potential reason is that Nate covers the legislature for us. He attends these hearings. He will often answer questions. If there's anything that we want to take a position on, we would need to do that as a body. He can't take a particular position on an issue at the legislature unless we have formally done that. So he'll get up there and they'll ask him a question and he'll say, the commission has not discussed this, so I can't take a position. Sometimes if he has just information to provide, he will do that. But it's just to make sure if there's anything the commission really feels strongly about, today would be the day to make a motion to take a position on it.
That's exactly right, Madam Chair. I can explain like how we came up with our estimate of prison beds and that sort of thing, but and how a certain bill would affect the mechanics of the staff, but I can't advocate or oppose a policy unless the commission takes a position. Okay, so I am going to display 8B2. So this is the 8B1 is the document that Senate Council prepared on the Senate Omnibus Bill. So this is the Omnibus Judiciary Bill. The Senate bill is a little bit farther along in the legislative process than backing up. Right now, the legislature is on spring break. So nothing is happening this week at the legislature. But a whole lot happened up till the end of last week. Last week was the end of last week was the third committee deadline, by which everything should have been in some form or another. And this omnibus public safety bill actually was very punctual and made all the deadlines. And it has been through the entire committee process and is now on the Senate floor, ready for the Senate to take final action. It could be amended further on the Senate floor before it's finally passed, assuming it is ultimately passed by the Senate. But this is pretty much the final bill. So this is pretty far along. I do not include in here all policy proposals. These are just the policy proposals that I thought would be interesting to you. The document 8B1 does include all the policy proposals in this bill. It's possible that there are some standalone bills that are making their way through, but honestly, I think on both the House and the Senate side, we're pretty much seeing all the significant policy in these omnibus bills. And I do have original bill references in I think all the Senate ones and most of the House ones, all the policies that are referenced there, and that's to give you you can look at the legislative history on that and so forth. That's the only reason why I have it. But okay, so the first policy is requiring the Sentencing Guidelines Commission to post its sentencing data on a searchable online platform, essentially modernizing our data. The data that this bill requires us to provide is data we already have. So it's not like we'd be having to come up with new data, but it would be a brand new way of presenting it. I guess you could say modernizing it so that users could get up and figure out, move their little toggles around and decide what they want to get. The stated reason for this bill is to increase judicial transparency. So the idea is that you could look up, Judge Smith and find out, what Judge Smith's record is as far as departing. Does Judge Smith depart on, give more mitigated dispositional departures than a judge in this judicial district or judges overall and that sort of thing, which we've been reluctant. I mean, when we give out this data, we typically caution the people who we're providing it to that it's difficult to make comparisons between judges because different judges have different caseloads. Some judges hardly, in major counties are restricted to dockets that don't even involve felony cases or very few felony cases. And in some rural counties, you might not see very many cases of a particular type. And so it's difficult to, it's not really an apples to apples comparison, but that's what would happen with this bill. So the intent is to increase judicial transparency. There are some agency costs to basically make this online platform happen. Those are all fully funded. And this is the legislature's very rich this year, so they've got a lot of money to spread around. And so they don't mind funding things, including prison beds, as we'll find out in a minute.
Do you want us to raise issues as we go, or how do you want to do this?
It's up to you, Andrew.
This is up to me. It might be easier to stick to the topic while we're on it.
Sure.
What I wanted to bring up is for this one, there were two things that concern me. One is that half of our data comes from the judicial branch, which has its own rules for privacy of data. And the law does require the judicial branch does require the commission to make that data public, but I actually question whether the legislature can do that when it's their data. So there's like a issue there, the technical issue that I feel like some lawyers in the legislature need to figure out, not me. But then the other thing that I do think that bothered me was, while I think it's a great idea to put the data online, the law itself was really specific about how it needed to be searchable by individual fields. And, I just thought, why don't you just tell us what data we need to put up there and then leave that to us to figure out the best interface to produce a search that's going to provide for useful information for somebody. I mean, that was the piece that bothered me a little bit. And if I were to say anything back against the bill, I'd say just open it up a little bit so that we can work with the developer to make the best interface we can. I don't know. I see Commissioner Middlebrook nodding her head. I don't know if anyone else has any comments there.
Madam Chair, I think that's a good idea because it's hard to know what exactly a developer is going to recommend, right?
Right. And it seemed like it literally, if you read the bill, it lists all the factors, right? All the data elements that we have, one of them being criminal history, one of them being severity level, and they want it searchable on a single field. So someone runs a search to get all cases where the person has a criminal history score of 6. What does that tell you? Not a whole lot. But, all cases in Malheur County with a criminal history score of 6 in 2019 might be a useful search. I don't know. Just feels like a developer could give us some guidance on what a good interface would be to allow for meaningful searches and search results, so that we're not giving out crap that can be misinterpreted. And, I don't know. So I don't know. That would be my suggestion on this one.
Madam Chair, I think that's an interesting point about judicial branch data. I mean, there are basically two issues that we come up against with judicial branch data as far as further releasing it. One has to do with juvenile data. I'm pretty careful about protecting that. And the other has to do with, Jill, the term is escaping me right now, but it's like mass data. It's bulk data. Do they call it bulk data? Okay, so giving out bulk data, there are some prohibitions on doing that. So this might fall in the realm of bulk data, and I think the danger is if the judicial branch construes that we are violating their rules on data practices, they'll probably just choke us off and won't provide us the data anymore. And then we'll kind of be out of business because we can't do much with the data we have unless we can match it up to judicial branch data. So yeah, that could be a problem if we do have to, if the judicial branch would perceive us as being in violation of their data practices rules. And you're right that the Data Practices Act does require us to honor
the same level, right?
the rules that the entity that gave it to us had.
Right,
And the judicial branch is not subject to the data practice.
exactly.
But
I mean, like, we could theoretically enter into an agreement with the judicial branch for this data, for this purpose, right? But, you know, I have a question in my mind about whether the legislature can tell the judicial branch they have to do that. You know, so it's like, it's weird. So I don't want to get in the way of posting data online. I think that's a great idea. I just feel like they haven't worked out all the kinks here on what needs to happen in order for it to occur. You know.
Yeah, good point.
Very good point. I mean, so this would be a good time Chair, for a motion to authorize me, for example, to advocate to resolve some of these problems in the bill. I mean, I could work with the bill author over. I mean, at this point.
Yeah, we don't know if it'll go forward, but.
Right, but assuming it will go forward, I assume at this point, if it's gone through committee, it's cleared all the committee hurdles, that it's well on its way to being the Senate position, and then the House will pass their position, which you'll see they don't look a lot alike, frankly. I mean, I thought there was nothing in common, but I think I recently heard on the news today that, or yesterday, that there was a waiver of the $8 fee to download documents that was in both bills. So apparently there's one thing that both of them agree on, but otherwise, I don't know what the conference committee process is going to be like on resolving these two bills. But there would be an opportunity, certainly a conference committee for us to testify about these things. So if you give your opinion at the next meeting, it'll probably be too late. I mean, technically the session won't be over, but the time for input may have passed. So that's why we're bringing it up at this meeting.
Madam Chair, I don't think we're taking a position. I don't think we want to take a position. I think that any comments by our executive director to the proponents of whatever they're trying to do over the legislature, hey, have you thought about this, or this might be an impediment, maybe you should look at this, or maybe you could make sure the judicial branch, maybe make sure that this can work. I think that's just all helpful to the process and not necessarily taking any position or advocating for anything necessarily, except, hey, we're dealing with this. If you want us, if this is going to pass, we have to make sure that you cover these bases.
Yeah. I agree with that. I agree with that. I think it is in a position, it is helpful feedback. So is everyone comfortable if Nate were to provide that type of feedback on these bills? Okay, I'm seeing a lot of head nods.
And as long as we're not stating the commission's either for this or against this.
Right.
But if you're going to do this,
right,
these are issues to deal with.
Yep.
And I have provided technical input on various bills without the commission's authority.
Yeah. Absolutely. Okay. Keep the train going.
All right, number two. So, and you'll see, I've picked what I thought might be things that the commission might be interested to hear. It directly affects the commission, increases prison populations, and reduces community supervision. pardons, mandatory minimums, or even a sentence to discretion. So I provided those as check boxes to help you sort of read this chart. So the second one does directly affect the commission. It requires the Sentencing Guidelines Commission to allow remote participation at meetings and to post meeting videos online. And I will say, and I should point this out, so Judge Larkin testified in favor of this bill when it was heard before the Senate Judiciary Committee. And she did so in her individual capacity as a commission member. You're all welcome to do that as long as you don't represent that you're speaking for the Sentencing Guidelines Commission if there hasn't been a vote on it, right? I mean, if there's been a vote on it, of course you can speak for the Sentencing Guidelines Commission. But I just don't want you to get the impression that you can't yourself present information to the legislature from the expertise that you have as, first of all, in your role, and second, as a member of the commission. But so basically, this just requires us to do what we're already doing. So we've been doing this really, we've had remote participation since April of 2020, and we've been posting our meeting videos online since summer of 2021. The next one, requires county attorneys to report case level data on every felony dismissal, including the reasons for dismissal, to MSGC. So this was, I think the proponents were the Minnesota Police and Peace Officers Association, if I'm not mistaken. And they were basically saying, oh, this will be easy. This is just like the 6-9-11 reports that the county attorneys have to do now. Well, the problem is the 6-9-11 reports are 87 reports, one from each county attorney. This is thousands of reports, one from each case that is dismissed. And it gets into quite a bit of detail on each case. So this is going to be a pretty massive expense, and it's been funded on our side. I will say it hasn't been funded on the county attorney's side. So, and Bob Small told me, and I put this in the fiscal note, that it's going to cost about $7 million across the 87 counties for the county attorneys to basically gear up the personnel and technical infrastructure that's going to be required to create these reports that we're then going to collect, which we're going to need our own technical infrastructure and personnel support. But it's going to be more concentrated. It's not going to be spread across 87 counties. But it is funded on our side.
So go ahead. I want to say something too.
How is the Guidelines Commission involved in this?
We are the receiving, it's kind of like the 6-9-11 reports. So if you recall, our report to the legislature, it has all this stuff that's commission stuff. And then it's got a part that is basically, here's the county attorney's report. Basically, we're responsible for collecting all 87 reports from the 87 county attorneys and presenting it to the legislature. We're required to add our analysis, but essentially it's their data. And it doesn't always match up with our data, frankly, but we pass along the county attorney's reporting on here's what happened to these 6-9-11 offenses under which the mandatory minimums of 6-9-11 applied, which we'll be talking about later. Here's what we did with them. And then we just pass it along to the legislature. So this is essentially that.
It falls into our clearinghouse of data of responsibility. We have a much broader mandate or charge to look at criminal justice data. We've just never done it beyond sentencing, right? So I think that for as much controversy as we sometimes engender on our policy side, our data side is unquestioned. Like, we have an amazing staff who do incredible work and get so much praise at the legislature for the work that we do. I think that there was a desire to sort of take it back a step and look at another step in the process, and our staff was looked at as like the place that could get it done. I think that's what happened. Commissioner Moore.
Madam Chair, these dispositions don't really involve sentencing in any way, shape, or form. I mean, I think the whole concern here relates to prosecutorial discretion. That was my perception.
Yeah.
So I understand that we become the repository of lots of information, but one wonders about is that an effective use of commission time? and resources, I guess, to be the repository of this, or is there some other place where perhaps it could be? And I guess I was also going to ask Nate, is the County Attorneys Association taking a position on this?
Well, I don't.
We have. If I might, Madam Chair.
Commissioner
I've
Lett?
had conversations with Bob Small about this, but I'm not going to say anything about those conversations because I don't think he's testified publicly on this $7 million, but.
Let's
certainly
let
in our fiscal-
Commissioner Lett's trying to say something. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I can advise the commission that the county attorneys have taken a position on this and twice have spoken in opposition of this for a multitude of reasons. And one of them obviously is just the lack of resources that we would have to comply with this information. And a lot of this information is available through the judicial branch generally. And to Commissioner Moore's comment about sentencing, it would actually impact sentencing information because, for example, if you have a disposition on a case, sentencing on a case, and it involves like the dismissal of 2 other cases along with it as part of a sentencing on one of them, and that's the basis for the dismissal, that's the kind of information that would be required to be reported and the why behind it. But the County Attorneys Association has opposed this and has continued to oppose it.
I was going to say too that, well, I was looking at the bill and it focuses on cases that have been charged. So they're not asking for collection of cases that were not charged. So that I know that, there's a number of reasons that prosecutors don't charge for a variety of legitimate reasons. And they're not seeking that information this time around. They're seeking information on why dismissals are happening after the point of charging. So when I looked at this, I thought, why would we subject county attorneys to providing anything on paper when honestly, if this, again, this is like in the realm of, I'm not here to support it or oppose it, but if it passes, then we should just get most of the data from the judicial branch. I mean, most of it would come right from them. The judicial branch knows which cases are charged, which ones are dismissed. That would give us a base to send to the county attorneys to fill in dismissal reasons rather than making them collect the data, fill out a form for every case on the front end. I mean, it just seems like there's a way that you could reduce the amount of work that everybody has to do. And this bill is too prescriptive again on like what it would take to do the job. So yeah, I don't think the county attorneys should be asked to do that level of work. It's not worth their time.
All right, so moving on to Senate File 2850, under Minnesota law, an executed sentence is defined as containing 2 parts. At least 2/3 of an executed sentence is the term of imprisonment, and up to 1/3 of the executed sentence is the supervised release term. That's not a fixed number. By misbehaving in prison, a defendant can stay longer than 2/3 and reduce that supervised release time. But that is sort of the default, is 2/3 in prison, 1/3 supervised release. The bill, and this is one of the demographic impact statements, that the bill would change that 2/3 number to 3/4 of the executed sentence. So it would do 2 things. It would increase the term of imprisonment and it would decrease the supervised release term. So that's why this box, that's why we caption this: increases prison population and reduces community supervision. So the Department of Corrections, normally we do fiscal impact estimates of prison bed impact, but I looked at this and I said, this is a math problem for the Department of Corrections, essentially. They know how big their population is and they know what would happen if 2/3 turned into 3/4. And the Department of Corrections estimated that 884 prison beds would come from the bill itself. However, we did all the rest of our fiscal note estimates based on an assumption of 2/3 imprisonment. So when you change all those other prison bed estimates to 3/4, you came up with another 156 prison beds from its impact on the other beds.
So like if the 60911 bill changed, that would also have a cascading effect if this changed with it, is what you're saying.
Right. So for example, so we've got, so the 60911 bill, 2673, just jumping up to that, has 888 prison beds. That's under the 2/3 assumption. But if you were to take the 3/4 assumption, that would increase, and that would be part of the 156 prison beds that we're talking about here.
Yep, got it.
The next bill, Senate File 635, establishes a minimum term of imprisonment. Currently, through a legislative oversight, the murder of an unborn child first degree does not define a minimum term of imprisonment. It defines the life sentence, so it's a life sentence, but it doesn't say how long you actually have to serve on that life sentence before you get out. And we brought this up to the commission in 2019, and the commission, I think, unanimously voted to recommend that the legislature define the minimum term of imprisonment. It didn't recommend what the definition should be, but it just said this oversight should be corrected. So the legislative choice here is to make murder of an unborn child minimum term of imprisonment to be equal to those of the corresponding murder in the first degree statutes minimum term of imprisonment. And so that's what's being done here. Senate File 2672 requires Senate confirmation of governor-appointed commission members, not judicially appointed commission members. So that's everybody except the judges and the commissioner of corrections. It doesn't specifically say that the designation of chair has to be judicially appointed, but that member, if that member were a governor-appointed commission member, would have to be judicially confirmed or senatorially confirmed. Senate File 2843 would enhance penalties for car theft if the stolen car was used in furtherance of a crime of violence within a week after the theft. And there's a provision in the law that says that this can be separately punished from the underlying crime of violence that occurs within a week of the stolen car theft. 18 prison beds, and I know that the bill graduates the statutory maximum by the vehicle's value, which seems kind of funny to me because the point isn't that you're, committing a crime of violence with a really nice car versus a really junky car. But I will say that is how the legislature typically does those things, that theft offenses are graduated by the vehicle's value. And I will also say that the commission has historically ignored vehicle value. And so all permanent theft of a motor vehicle are ranked at severity level 4, regardless of the value of the car. It doesn't matter as far as the commission is concerned. And that may be what the commission decides to do if this becomes law.
Yeah, I had a little chat with Nate before the meeting because that one just rubbed me the wrong way from a good sentencing policy point of view. It just seems to be overlooking that the critical fact is that the person committed a second offense with that vehicle. So, if I was to advise the legislature, I would say look at it as an enhancement rather than increasing the stat max in that way, and then we would follow suit. Anyway.
There it is.
There it is.
So Senate File 3224 requires aggravated departures for dangerous career offenders. So those are, and it doesn't specify, so 609-1095 allows, it has 3 provisions in it, basically. So one provision applies to people who have committed multiple dangerous offenses, and it says mandatory commit. And then there's another provision called what I call the dangerous offender statute that says if a repeat violent offender is found by a jury to be a dangerous person or I can't remember what the term is, then the judge may impose an aggravated departure. This bill changes may to shall, so the judge must impose an aggravated departure. We assumed in our fiscal note that was probably happening in most cases where the prosecutor went through the trouble of proving that the defendant was a dangerous person. The judge was probably going along with the request for the aggravated departure. But that would require, it doesn't quantify it. So, you could add an additional month, I suppose, to the sentence and you'd be meeting the aggravated durational departure. And then there's also the career offender statute, which also requires a jury finding. That's your sixth, I can't remember, I think it's your sixth felony. If that's committed as part of a pattern of conduct, so a jury has to find that it's committed as part of a pattern of conduct, you also may impose an aggravated departure. The bill changes may to shall. So this is one of the big ones. Obviously the 2/3 to 3/4 was the big one. And I checked the box on that, the one we just talked about. It hardens mandatory minimum or eliminates sentencing discretion, because right now a judge at least has the discretion not to impose an aggravated departure. This also reduces sentencing discretion. So right now 60911, which we talked about a couple times already, makes mandatory minimums for basically three classes of cases. One is possession of ammunition or a firearm by somebody who's previously been convicted of a crime of violence. That has a mandatory minimum under 60911. Doesn't have to be involved in a new offense, just merely possessing of ammunition or a firearm with that status is a new offense. But then there's also a limited list of offenses under 60911 that if you're committing one of those offenses and you have in your possession a firearm or you're using a firearm to commit that offense, that also has a mandatory minimum. And then if you're committing that same list of offenses and you are using a dangerous weapon other than a firearm, that also has a mandatory minimum. So this takes that the ones involving the firearm, not the dangerous weapon like a knife or something. It doesn't harden those mandatory minimums. That was the Gazelka bill that we did the first demographic impact statement on. That would have hardened all of them. This only hardens the ones involving a firearm. And so basically the mandatory minimums are no longer departable. And that has a pretty significant impact because it eliminates all mitigated dispositional departures in those cases. So that's where the 888 prison beds come from. I should just make a note here about prison beds and fiscal notes. So when I'm giving you prison beds numbers, these are eventual prison bed numbers. It takes a long time to get to, it can take decades at some point to where we finally get up to the 888 numbers, just because prison terms are so long. You don't feel that impact right away. So sometimes legislators only look at the current biennium and maybe the next biennium coming up, which oftentimes the full price of these bills is not reflected in. I'm just going to make that point. There is an exception for an unwitting accomplice. So if somebody is not in possession of the firearm, but their accomplice is in possession of the firearm, and they didn't know the accomplice had the firearm, then they're off the hook as far as the hard mandatory minimum goes. So you recall in 2020 the Commission created a 5-year presumptive probation cap. SF 870 would expand the list of offenses that are exempt from the 5-year presumptive probation cap. There is some overlap between the statutory list, the bill's list, and the list the Commission already has. So the Commission already exempts some of the listed offenses.
I do want to make a comment there because I took the time to figure out where the overlap was and what was different about the law. And I would say that what troubles me the most, I'm not troubled by expanding the list of offenses. If there are offenses that we missed that maybe should have longer presumptive probation terms, I'm not opposed to considering those. We actually used a list that was developed by the County Attorneys Association in creating that initial list. But what's on there are also the drug offenses, which is really the reason that we put a cap on probation to begin with. If that passes and drug offenses are exempted from the 5-year cap, then we don't have a 5-year cap. We don't have a 5-year presumptive probation term. So I don't agree with the addition of those offenses to the list. I don't have an issue necessarily. I don't feel one way or the other about any of the other offenses that are being added. There's second-degree manslaughter is not on our list, but it's on theirs. There's a couple of other things. I'm not sure what the rationale was, but I don't have strong feelings one way or the other. But I don't agree with adding the drug offenses back to the list of exempted offenses.
Madam Chair, what drug offenses are included?
All of them, everything in 152.
50?
Everything in 152, if I recall correctly.
I don't
Yeah.
have it memorized, but I could look it up.
Here, I can pull it up too.
This little quick interlude here, where, Nate, what's the status of the House on this bill?
That has cleared the first committee. It hasn't gone through finance or gone to the floor yet. And the version that I've given to you is pretty similar to the version that cleared committee. So it didn't make a lot of changes. I don't think it made any significant changes. Well, I don't know if I can really effectively pull it up. I don't know if somebody else can. Tell me what line it's on.
870?
It's-
870?
Well, it should be,
Yeah,
Yeah, it's 870.
yeah, it's in the omnibus bill as, section 25, maybe I can find section 25. Oh, here it is, okay.
There it is.
All right, so it's first, second, third degree sale, fourth degree sale. I don't see fifth degree. So it looks like third and fourth degree possession are excluded. And fifth degree is excluded.
And I still disagree, even if those are not in there, I mean, those first and second degree offenses are where we saw 40-year probation terms imposed. And I can't support that. I just can't support that. I mean, I would, we may not all agree on this, but I would love it if we could make a motion to oppose the addition of the drug crimes to the list of excluded offenses for probation, or for the probation limit. I don't really have any strong feelings on the other ones.
I would support that.
You making a motion?
I am.
Okay, so motion by Commissioner Morath. Do we have a second? Commissioner Middlebrook seconds. Any discussion?
well, Madam Chair, I would just say this is really, although it's late in the process, it's early in the process. We don't have a House bill. So it's a long way from.
Right, but everything's going to play out before we come back to a meeting. So if we have an idea that we don't want to support, if there's an issue, like if we want Nate to be able to say Christian doesn't support this piece of it as they're going to conference, then now would be the time we'd have to do that.
I guess my comment would be the only time for input will be at conference committee, and it's reasonable. Everything that I'm presenting to you, I would suppose would be at conference committee. I don't, unless it's taken off, I mean, in this case, it would have to get taken off the floor. So, I mean, yeah, will it pass conference committee? Who knows? But it will be in conference committee. And that's really our only chance for input, your only chance for input.
Any other discussion?
Well, Madam Chair, my whole
Commissioner Knudsen.
concern about, so in the judicial branch, we say, you know what, we're a separate branch, and legislature makes substantive policy, and that's kind of how I view their role in this situation as well, that the Guidelines Commission is somewhat of an executive branch administering certain duties, and the legislature can do what the legislature is going to do as long as their eyes are wide open and we give them the benefit of all the data and the information that we have. And I just think my understanding or view of this is that we would stay out of substantive issues like this. So I'm going to vote no.
Okay. Any other comments? Commissioner Larkin.
Thanks. Thank you, Madam Chair. In the time I've been on the commission, I've not seen this come up before where we're asked to weigh in on potential pending legislation. So it is a little odd to me because we exist at the behest of the legislature. We are supposed to put into place the laws they produce. So it seems odd to me to weigh in the middle of the process and say, oh, this is a bad law, don't do it. I mean, I think we let the process play out and then we deal with the outcome. It seems odd to me to be involved. I don't know, just an observation. For that reason, I would speak against the motion and vote against it.
Commissioner Moore.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I share Commissioner Knudsen's concern about members of the judicial branch getting themselves involved in a policy decision, legislative policy decision that's being debated right now, particularly given the status that this is. I know this probation cap issue was before the commission and led to a lot of discussion before I'm here, but I'm really uneasy about expressing a position on legislation that is pending before the Senate or the House, particularly in circumstances where there could be potential, I suppose, challenges or interpretations of that legislation. So, I mean, that's my concern. I would speak in opposition of it, not really focused on the merits of it, but on the process of us becoming involved in it. Maybe my understanding of the Guidelines Commission's role here is not well developed, but it just seems like we're treading on some thin ice here, I believe.
And I will respectfully disagree. I mean, it is part of our role to advise the legislature, and we certainly have weighed in on bills in the past. The one that I can think of that was most significant, that because I was director at the time, I was the one testifying for the legislature, was when the legislature proposed to make all sex offenders move to indeterminate sentencing rather than determinate sentencing. And the commission opposed that bill. And I got up there and I told the legislature that we opposed that bill because it went against our principles, long-standing principles in Minnesota to have determinate sentencing. So I think that where we're weighing in on sentencing issues, I feel like we are very well grounded, and that is our expertise, and that's what we're here to do. To me, this is a sentencing issue because it would be setting the terms of the sentence, and for that reason, I think it's highly appropriate for the commission to weigh in. Commissioner Middlebrook.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would just add in that back when we passed the provision in the guidelines for the 5-year cap, we based that on what was a lot of the stakeholders had put forth to the legislature, and they worked on that for a significant amount of time to try to get that 5-year cap in place. And I think the stakeholders all in their list had taken out the drug crimes. And I think we modeled our provision in the guidelines then that was passed after that. So what I recall is those drug crimes were not in there because that was one of the biggest concerns with the disparity in people getting the 40-year, 20-year probation periods, depending on where they lived in the state.
All right, any other discussion?
This is Commissioner Huntsey. And I would just like to, thank you. I'd like to just piggyback off that. All of the testimony that we received And as the people that were there, the commissioners were there at that public hearing, know that that was probably one of the longest public hearings that we've had as in the commission. And it was all about the disparities that were happening within the people who were receiving these long-term probation sentences because of drug crimes, and longer than they would get if they were sentenced to prison. And so for us to not take a position on that when we had the public come to us and we were there listening to them and their concerns, and we crafted this because of those concerns. So I think we have an absolute ethical right to and responsibility to oppose this and to say something and take a position on this.
Any other discussion or questions? All right, hearing none, let's vote on this one.
To the Morath motion to recommend that the legislature delete references to Chapter 152 offenses from Article 2, Section 23 of Senate File 2673, second engrossment. Estrada?
She wasn't here today.
Oh, Estrada absent. Hansi?
Yes.
Hansi, yes. Knutson?
No.
Knutson, no. Ladd?
No.
Ladd, no. Larkin?
No.
Larkin, no. Middlebrook?
Yes.
Middlebrook, yes. Moore?
No.
Moore, no. Morath?
Yes.
Morath, yes. Schnell?
Yes.
Schnell, yes. Chair Mitchell?
Yes.
Chair Mitchell, yes. Madam Chair, there are 5 votes in favor, 4 votes opposed.
And with that, the motion is approved.
The next item is Senate File 3190. That would expand
Madam Chair,
fourth
may
degree.
I be recognized before we move on to the next matter?
Commissioner
I
Larkin?
I would simply assume and ask that if the position the majority has just taken is going to be presented to the legislature as the position of the Sentencing Guidelines Commission, that the legislature be informed that it was essentially a split vote of just by one. I don't know, it's 5-6 or whatever it was. But in other words, I think we should be transparent in what the vote was in terms of yeas and nays. So is that possible?
Truth, I'd rather the position be presented as a position, but I don't have strong feelings one way or the other. And really, it's not that we're going to go out and say, let's change this. It's if this is discussed in conference committee, then our views will be made. You will make our views known.
And I just ask that those
Right.
views include the vote. So the legislature is not misled into thinking that the entire Sentencing Guidelines Commission supports the position that's put forward on its behalf. Given that the legislature has demonstrated a willingness and interest in minority positions over the past couple of years.
All right, let's move on.
Senate File 3190. So fourth degree assault converts misdemeanor offenses into gross misdemeanor, sometimes felony offenses, if they're committed against certain people. For example, assault against a peace officer resulting in demonstrable bodily harm. One of the protected groups are healthcare providers in an emergency room. This takes away the emergency room limitation and protects healthcare providers wherever. The next one on 1462 expands criminal abuse of a vulnerable adult to include causing harm by illegally administering a controlled substance. We didn't assume a fiscal impact here because there already are offenses that punish causing harm by illegally administering a controlled substance. So we didn't really see how this was going to increase any prison beds. Senate File 2573 creates a crime called carjacking, which is robbery where the property that's taken by force is or threat of force is a motor vehicle. And it basically takes the robbery penalties and adds a increased penalty to it. Sort of like what we've been talking about with some other enhancements today. But what's particularly interesting about this bill is it creates non-waivable mandatory minimums for those offenses. So it doesn't just enhance the penalty, it doesn't just create a mandatory minimum, but it creates a non-waivable mandatory minimum, such as what's being done with the 60911 bill. And that adds 261 prison beds. And I think I should probably pause, and I checked both boxes here, increases prison population, reduces community supervision, and hardens mandatory minimums or eliminates sentencing discretion. And I think I should pause here and just tally up some of these numbers that we've been talking about. The total prison bed impact, eventual prison bed impact of the Senate omnibus bill is 2,290 beds, which is and that's basically, you just add up all the numbers in the notes column here, you'll come up with 2,290, which, just to give some perspective, if in terms of prison capacity, is equal to Stillwater and Shakopee combined. So it's a big bill in terms of eventual prison beds. Senate File 2844 enhances penalties for fleeing a peace officer in a motor vehicle when done in a culpably negligent, death-defying manner. That's how I put it. That's not what the bill says exactly. Senate File 3487 enhances penalty for theft for resale. It calls it organized retail theft. And the same bill would convert shoplifting to burglary if the shoplifter has been given a trespass notice within the previous year. So basically the merchant says, stay out of my business, and the person comes back into the business with the intent to steal or does steal in that business. That becomes burglary, which is kind of interesting. I mean, I kind of get the appeal legally. Essentially burglary is sort of trespass plus theft, and that's kind of what it is. And this was the only bill where we didn't estimate a prison bed impact. So that's the Senate omnibus bill. Let me jump quickly to the House omnibus bill, which is a little bit shorter, and I hope we'll go quicker. Well, I should say my paper's a little bit shorter.
Yeah, the bill's not any shorter.
I don't know
Very
if the
long.
bill's shorter. And I may have missed a significant issue on the juvenile front on this paper. I think they might increase the age at which a person's eligible to be prosecuted. Or, I don't know if prosecuted is the right word, but to be treated as a juvenile delinquent as opposed to just a child in need of protection. So I don't talk about that in here. But so this bill, the language that you have is just as it was introduced in committee at the beginning of last week. It didn't change too significantly. I don't think anything that I'm going to tell you is different from the language that made it out of committee, but it still has another committee to go before it makes it to the House floor. But the references to articles and sections is probably all going to change. The first bullet redefines the public safety term that's used in Minnesota Sentencing Guidelines Commission's charter statute to include references to human rights and other changes. There's a new public safety innovation board that's tasked with improving public safety by increasing public safety providers' efficiency, effectiveness, and capacity. That's under Department of Public Safety Office of Justice Programs. Under the same department is the Office of Missing and Murdered Black Women and Girls. There's an expansion of the qualified domestic violence related offense list to include 5 homicide and kidnapping related offenses. That would add 3 prison beds, and then the next crime would add 1 or 2 prison beds by amending labor trafficking definitions. Those are the only provisions in this bill that increase prison beds. There's a task force to review the juvenile justice system. House File 1355, we did a fiscal note on, a demographic impact statement on, and a fiscal note. But this demographic impact statement was different from the others for 2 reasons. One, it was a decrease, not an increase in prison beds or felony cases. And 2 is this was on felony cases, so it didn't meet our significant threshold for prison beds, but it did meet our significance threshold for felony cases annually. That's 50, and this was a decrease in 81 felony cases annually. So basically, Right now, marijuana resin is not included within the definition of small amount of marijuana, which is eligible for petty misdemeanor treatment. This adds less than or equal to 8 grams of marijuana resin within that small amount definition, and it establishes a gross misdemeanor threshold for first-time marijuana possession. So you recall that the Drug Sentencing Reform Act added a gross misdemeanor 5th-degree offense for first-time trace cases. Marijuana was not included in that. This includes marijuana in that. So more than 42 and a half, more than the small amount threshold, basically. Roughly double. I think it is exactly double the threshold. Creates a task force to review the state's response to drug problems. Tasks a new indeterminate sentencing release board with taking the authority that the Commissioner of Corrections has to make supervised release decisions on eligible life sentences, and gives it instead to a board of people. So he has a little help there. This would make our analyst classified state employees, which passed as a standalone bill on April 4th. This requires House File 4174 adds the requirements for criminal liability for accomplices to felony murder. So in order to be liable for felony murder, the bill would require an accomplice to share in the principal's intent to kill for first degree. So for felony murder in the first degree, the principal has to have the intent to kill. This says that the accomplice has to have the intent to kill too, or the accomplice isn't liable for that offense. Of course, they're still liable for participating in the underlying felony, but we assumed in all cases it was going to be a severity level 8 offense, because most of these looked like they were either aggravated robbery in the first degree or burglary involving a weapon, some severity level 8 offense. So we resentenced these people in our fiscal note to severity level 8 offenses instead of these life sentences. In the case of second degree, they had to have they had to be a major participant, and they had to have an extreme indifference to human life. And it also allows retroactive applications of this policy. So we estimate an eventual, actually almost an instant impact of reducing 18 prison beds. At one point, that's going to peak a little bit at 23 prison beds, but it's eventually going to level out to 18 prison beds. I think it's 20 something. And the reason for that is you've got sort of 2 effects going on. You've got the retroactive application, and then you've got the long-term application as people are not being sentenced to prison for life where they are now. This would, so this is a directly, 1369 would require the commission to convene a task force on the collection of charging and related data, which would involve a number of different entities, including prosecutors, and basically we'd have to run it. And so we just said, well, we're going to have to hire a bunch of consultants to do that because we can't do it ourselves. And that's what that $238,000 is. And then there's various probation reform measures, which I'm not going to describe. And that concludes the legislative update. Other than to say that as I already said, the bill to make staff classified employees did pass the House on April 4th. There was no debate, and yet there was a 77 to 57 votes. So I don't know where those 57 no votes came from, but there they were. Madam Chair, I'm just going to make an announcement at this point. So up till now, nobody can raise their hands in this meeting. What I'm going to do is change that so that people can raise their hands. And for members of the public, in a few minutes, we're going to have a public input time. And if you are participating by computer and you'd like to, so this is a little different than how we've done it in the past. If you're participating by computer and you'd like to make a comment during the public input time, in just about a second, actually right now, you should have the option in the lower right corner of your screen, I think, you should have the option to raise your hand. So please raise your hand at that time. I'm a little uncomfortable just opening up everybody's microphones. I think there's some privacy issues there, so I'm only going to open up the microphones of people who are raising their hands at this time. If you're on the phone, don't worry, I'll take care of you separately. But for anybody who's accessing through WebEx, not calling in through phone, I would ask you to raise your hands if and only if you want to be called on in the public input section, which is coming up.
All right, so then did you want to do your director's report?
Yes, I can move on to the executive. If we're done with the legislative update, then I can move on to the executive director.
Yeah, is there anything else that anyone wanted to raise on the legislative side? No? Okay, go ahead. Oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner Middlebrook, I missed you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have a quick question. Do you have a timeline, kind of when things are supposed to, I know you gave a little bit about this week and the following week, but any timeline on when it's all wrapped up and,
Well, I mean, so it's,
Legislature?
yeah, the legislature?
so, I mean, so the House bill has to move through Finance Committee, and then it's got to go to the floor, and then it's got to have a floor vote. So I would say that's a couple of weeks at least. And then the Senate might get theirs done quicker. It'll go to the House. The two bills will not look alike, and so there will be a conference committee. The conference committee will probably meet maybe in 3 or 4 weeks. So it might be meeting during your next commission meeting. I think it's 4 weeks from today. But I think it's probably unlikely it'll be done at that point. And then, you know, I mean, this is a funny session because there's a lot of money floating around, but there's no shutdown looming if there's no agreement. So it's possible that some of these positions are just being taken for, I'm not going to say electoral posturing, but you know, sort of mindful of the fact that they have electorate that they want to vote for them in the fall. So it's possible this just might all blow up and nothing will get passed.
Yep.
I don't really know. But I guess I'm operating under the assumption that the conference committee will try to come to an agreement and compromise on some of these issues.
Yep. All right, go ahead and go to your director's report.
Okay, so the first item on the director's report is that there is a National Association of Sentencing Commissions, or NASC, which has an annual conference every year. We actually haven't had it the last couple of years. I've been on the executive committee the last couple of years, so we've been trying to sort of wrestle with COVID issues and planning this conference that didn't happen. But we are hoping to get it off the ground on August 8th through 10th in Portland, Oregon. We do have the funds this year to invite 2 commission members. I have a spreadsheet that I have to dust off and figure out who's up for that, but we have basically a priority list. It typically includes the chair and if we're lucky, one other member. I have been informed that the chair is self-funding because her employer wants her to go also. So that means two commission members other than the chair I'll be inviting to that conference. So I'll let you know on that by email. The electronic worksheet system was updated to reflect the interim guidance, the January interim guidance. So that went live on March 22nd. Record time. Thank you, Commissioner Chanel, for your excellent IT staff. It's always very willing to help us out. And the next item is the May 12th meeting location. So I told you last time that I was having some technical issues connecting to the VPN at this place. We had a meeting with IT, again, your helpful IT staff and other staff, and we couldn't get the problem to reproduce itself. It's like going to the mechanic and there's nothing wrong with your car. So everything seems to be working well in this room. So, I mean, I guess, Madam Chair, if you want us to explore this as being a permanent meeting room, we can do that. Otherwise, we have the Centennial Office Building, Lady Slipper Conference Room reserved for future meetings. It doesn't have the camera that automatically follows you around. I mean, that's kind of nice, but I guess I'll leave it up to you as to where you want to go. We can make either place work, Madam Chair. So, I mean, this has free parking, so that's nice.
Yeah, I like that too.
So
I'm not the only one.
I mean, we do pay for your parking, but you know.
Yeah, I know, but it's not the paying for the parking, it's the finding it. That's the trouble at the Capitol. You know?
Well, I will say the orange ramp is now, I don't know if you parked in the orange level before, but it's changed. So they popped the top off. There used to be like a sort of a park up there. That's now gone. And the entire orange ramp is now, the entire level is now metered parking. So I don't think you'll have trouble finding parking in the orange ramp anymore, for what it's worth.
Commissioner Larkin.
I would just note, because I was at the Senate hearing where the bill proposing that the commission continue to hold its meetings in a way that allows for remote public participation and that the meetings then be displayed electronically on the internet. It received support from everyone in the room. Both sides spoke in favor of that legislation. So it would seem to me that we're likely to see that passed. So I think until we know what happens with that, we should keep meeting at a location that allows remote participation. And I'm not sure if Lady Slipper does that or not. So that would be my only concern about returning to that room, because again, Senator Latt spoke in favor, everybody spoke in favor of it.
Sure.
Nate?
Lady Slipper does work for remote technology. They do have some nice technology. They've got microphones suspended from the ceilings, and they have a camera that you can. The camera does not follow. I don't know if you noticed this, but this camera follows the speaker automatically. That camera has, I think, 3 presets, and you have to press the button to make the camera change. So it's a little bit of a downgrade as far as the automatic camera goes, but it certainly complies with the statute either way. So we can make well the bill, but with our past process, we can do remote meetings at either place. We've tested it out.
Commissioner Chanel?
Madam Chair, members, not that I'm trying to save the DOC mileage from driving here down to the Capitol, but I would just say that, that there's a potential argument that there could be ease for even members of the public who did want to come to this location only because of the free parking and relative ease of access. And, we would certainly be willing to prioritize making sure that the room's available to the commission on the appointed dates as we go forward. And again, we'll go either way, but I just want to make sure that that's clear and that, while it can be convenient for members to come because we get free parking as we come report to meetings, for the members of the public that do decide not to take advantage of the remote option, should that become ongoing available, this could be a good option.
Yeah. Commissioner Larkin?
I agree with Commissioner Schnell on that point. I know I used to attend meetings there for the Interstate Offender Supervision Committee, and it's just like, it's an easy location to get to. It's an easy place to park. I mean, comparing that location to the Capitol, I just think you make it easier for everyone to continue doing it where you are. That said, I'm across the street from the Lady Slipper in my office, so it doesn't matter to me, but I think for everyone else, it might just be an easier location to arrive at.
Yeah. And it used to be where we met a long time ago in a galaxy far away before this room wasn't open at that point. It wasn't, because it was security issues that kept us out. All right. Yeah, I mean, well, we could talk more. I personally like this location for access reasons too, for what everybody else has said. I do think it's easier. So I would, but I think it's also, to some degree, we need to think about what's easier for staff. And so I'd like to have Nate take some consideration of that as well. All right.
Madam Chair,
yeah.
if I can just wrap that up, I think we'll just, staff is able to meet here. I mean, we've been, I don't think it'll be a problem for staff to continue to meet here. I guess we were having a staff meeting next week. We can discuss it, but it sounds like the consensus is, I haven't heard anybody say they prefer Centennial, including the person whose office is across the tunnel from us. So I think based on that, we would probably just pursue Afton going forward as this Afton room that we're in right now going forward. Madam Chair, the final point in my report was that Washington County Attorney Pete Orpid, a member of this commission from 2016 to 2020, passed away at the age of 66 on April 3rd after a brief battle with cancer. I want to let the commission know that a celebration of life for Pete Orpid will be held Wednesday, June 8th from 4 to 8 p.m., which is the evening before the June commission meeting at La Pointe Events, in Somerset, Wisconsin. Pete's family are inviting his family, friends, and colleagues to share his memory and join them in the final farewell to a beloved husband, father, and friend. Madam Chair, that concludes my report.
Thank you. Yeah, that was devastating news. Thanks for ending us on such a sad note. I don't have anything really to add to that other than to say it was really devastating to hear about Pete's death. I really considered him a mentor when I was a young staff attorney. He took the time to talk to me as well and to, allow me into his circle as he was working on issues. I loved his candor. I loved that he took the time to really understand issues. I know that he really pushed to develop policy for veterans, for people who were suffering from addiction. His county is one of the few in the state that has been trying dosage probation. And, everybody had to be on board, including the county attorney's office, to do that. So really, somebody who pushed the boundaries and really tried to do the right thing in all of his work, and he will be missed.
And an incredible sense of humor, I would add.
Yeah.
Also.
That's very true. That's very true. And as I was reading that bill on the motor vehicle theft today, I thought of Pete, because I'm like, he would use some colorful language to describe how this does not make sense, but I thought of him for that. All right, let's move on to public input.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm looking at the people who have joined by computer or smartphone, and it looks like 2 people have raised their hands, so this seems to be working. So I'm going to assume that everybody has been able to raise their hand who wanted to, and now I'm going to unmute Matt Majowski to start with.
Mr. Majowski.
Hello, I sent an email earlier in case I couldn't speak because I'm in a hospital waiting room, but things have cleared out. Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Just a couple of questions concerning the 3/4, 1/4 bill. Does that affect jail sentences? And how does that compare with other states' good time laws? Again, thank you, Commission, for all of your work.
Madam Chair, Matt, I don't think it affects people call the 2/3, 1/3 term of imprisonment rule good time, but technically good time is a term that applies to jail sentences, and I don't think it changes the good time rule for jail sentences. It's just changing the definition of term of imprisonment. Changing the definition of executed sentence so that the term of imprisonment is 3/4 and at least 3/4, and the supervised release term is up to 1/4, rather than at least 2/3 and up to 1/3.
Okay.
I think it's a good question, though, because I was going to say, I think it's a good question, though, because I think that a lot of jails informally follow the 2/3, 1/3 rule. So I don't think that there is a statute anywhere that says whether or not you need to follow that or not. So I don't know if it would change it.
I think there is a good time statute that says 2/3,
Is there?
1/3.
Is it 2/3? Okay. All
But
right.
I haven't seen that. I did not notice such a change to the good time rule in the bill, but
Yeah.
So
Okay.
I think that would still stay.
That makes sense. What was the second question again? No, I forgot.
Well, it was whether we compared it with other states, and I have not attempted to do that.
Yeah, huge variety. That's what I can say. Huge variety in how other states handle the amount of time that has to be served on the back end.
All right, so I'm going to mute Matt now, and I'm going to unmute Nicole McKinnon. Just a moment. All right, I've done that.
Hi, can you hear
Great,
me?
Nicole. Yes, we can. Please go ahead.
Okay, great. I was asked to share my story real quick, and I'll be quick, I promise. Just about how sentencing guidelines have affected my family. So I'll do that really quickly. So my daughter was a brand new middle school student. She was class president, swim team captain, really thriving in academics, sports, and in her social life. Everyone just loved her and wanted to be her friend and be around her because of the contagious energy that she had. She didn't really grow up with a male figure in her life, so when her school principal took a special interest in her, we felt grateful that she would now have that influence. She was so involved in school with student council and sports that it didn't feel really odd to us at the time that she was spending so much time in this principal's office. He would call her down from class pretty regularly and would help her through situations with friends or just general life problems. She used his office to charge her cell phone during the day and had him help her to reset her passwords on her phone from time to time as a precaution. At some point, she befriended a boy online who was from Duluth, Minnesota, and pretty quickly decided that they were dating. Over time, this boy started asking my daughter for inappropriate photos, and she was hesitant because she knew it wasn't right, and she didn't really want to talk to me about it because she knew that I would take her phone away and pretty much forbid her to this boy. And she would have been right about that. Instead, she decided to ask that principal for advice on the situation. And he decided to assure her that this was normal behavior and to encourage her to send the photos. So she did. Jumping to the end of the story, there was no teenage boy from Duluth. The person she was talking to online was actually that principal posing as the teenage boy. He used her, and later it was determined at least 55 children to obtain child pornography. He was arrested and arraigned, and I thought he would never set foot outside of prison again. Something this disgusting and devastating just had to carry a pretty hefty sentence if convicted. But I was very wrong about that. Apparently destroying the lives of 55 students would most likely carry a sentence of probation because this man was a well-loved member of the community, a first-time offender, which to me is just a nice way of saying the first time he was caught, and would probably not even need to register as a sex offender. It seemed like just a terrible joke, but this was the reality that we were faced with. We decided that we needed to move out of state because we couldn't risk running into this man around town. And luckily, in this case, there ended up being sufficient evidence to bring federal charges against him. So he was ultimately sentenced to 25 years in prison. But had that not happened, he would have only received probation. So I'm just wondering why we allow this in Minnesota. Aren't our children incredibly valuable and precious and deserve better than this? And I just want to urge us to send a strong message to sexual predators that we don't tolerate this type of abuse of our children. And to me, the only way to do that is to change the sentencing guidelines for this type of crime. Because this type of abuse really changes these kids, and I've seen it firsthand, and it's absolutely devastating. That bright, bubbly child of mine who is on such a good path is now a high school dropout, involved in drugs and dating inappropriate people. And that just was not the path she was on before this happened. This was abuse, trauma, abuse of power, and destroyed lives. And I just really want to advocate for the changing of sentencing guidelines.
Thank you for telling us your story today. I just wanted to be clear, do you know what the offense would have been under our guidelines?
I don't remember. The only thing that jumped out at me was that it would only carry probation.
Madam Chair,
Hey.
Ms. McKinnon, I was present when you testified several years ago in front of the House Crime Committee, and I just want you to know that I did transcribe your testimony, and the commission considered the transcript of your I did redact your daughter's name, and the commission did consider the transcript of your testimony when it conducted a comprehensive review of how the sentencing guidelines and the sex offender grid treated child pornography offenses. So I just want you to know that you were heard by the commission.
Okay, I appreciate that.
Thank you so much for coming today. Any other comments, questions, or any other business for today? Or did we hit everybody?
No, Madam Chair.
Oh, is there someone else?
Well, we have a phone caller who I could, and we have one more person to raise there.
Okay.
So I'm gonna go to the person who was on the phone. I'm going to unmute you in just a moment here. All right. Phone caller, you're now unmuted. Did you want to make a public comment or not?
Hello. Yes, actually, I would.
Okay. Could you tell us your name, please?
Hi, my name is Michelle Hipstag. I actually spoke with you guys last month at the prior meeting. Thank you for allowing us to be able to communicate with all of you and be a part of the meeting. I do appreciate that as a Minnesota resident. And my condolences on the loss of your colleague. I am sorry to hear that. Sounds like he was a wonderful man. I guess what I'm speaking about yet again is just to address for the voiceless and, you know, a couple things with the sentencing point reduction, as I'm sure that you are well aware that I am not for that. And I have sent you all emails and a video that I hope that you get a chance to watch, and a little clip of my story with my daughter and my grandson who were hit by a repeat offender. Which is why I am so passionate about this, in fact. And, you know, there's a couple things, I guess, that I want to bring up. One is the little 2.5-year-old in Polk County that was on the recent Amber Alert. I don't know if any of you were familiar with that case. He was abducted from the bedroom window at like 4:30 in the morning. The Amber Alert was put out, and they found him later. That was actually a repeat offender that had taken him, non-family related. So there was another one, and he had offenses of sexual assault on his record because I looked him up, and they were all under probation only. Much like with the individual who hit my daughter and grandson, they're squeaking through they're slipping through the cracks, and there is a break in the system, as I said in my email. I'm not sure exactly how to fix it, but I just don't feel that lowering the point system is an appropriate thing to do. And, you know, another thing I guess that I do have a question on, and this is by no means any attack on any county attorneys, because I adore working with them and appreciate everything that they do, but one thing that I have noticed in my communicating with multiple different victims throughout the state is that there's a lot of that families, and even it seems that the attorney's offices aren't very familiar with things like Drake's Law and Little Allen's Law. Some of them are, some of them aren't. But I guess my concern is are these laws that someone died, you know, people died, and laws, as you know, are very difficult to pass, and you put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into them, and heart and soul. And so are these laws being applicably applied correctly? And if you're not familiar, are you familiar with Little Allen's Law or Drake's Law? Any of you? No? Okay. Well, maybe I'll send you some stuff on that, because those were specifically done because of repeat offender DUIs and the crimes against the victims. So I guess I will send you guys that info, and I just really, really beg of you and implore you to please hear us. You know, I'm I'm all for change and growth, and I'm all for everybody makes mistakes. I get that, and I understand that. I'm not perfect either, but you know, there's that saying of that when you make a mistake the first time, but the second time it's no longer a mistake because it was a choice. And somewhere there's this break in the system, and I'm really hoping that with you guys and the county attorneys and legislation and us as victims, that we can work together to hopefully do something to make this better. Let's fix this. Let's work together. Let's fix the break, because ultimately that's what we all want, is we want the break fixed. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate your testimony today.
Madam Chair, we have one more, Kelly Jansen.
Okay.
You're now unmuted.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'm sorry for your loss of your friend and colleague. The reason why I'm just speaking today is that this weekend we had an immediate family member that was in a car accident, and he was hit by a drunk driver. Unfortunately, he was hit head on, going over a hill, so he didn't see them coming. And thankfully it was at lower speeds, so his injuries were minor compared to what they could have been. But he did have to get 5 staples in his head, so he spent about 4 hours in the ER in the middle of the night. He got a concussion and neck strain. He's been out of work for 5 days now. So that's the impact on the victim. And of course, we found out that this wasn't the first time she's been driving drunk and got caught. So she's a repeat offender, so it'll be a felony. I don't know all the details at this point of what her previous convictions were, but I just want you to hear, you know, from a victim's story, and that whatever the initial sentence was obviously not enough to act as a deterrent for her. Thank you for
Thank you.
time.
Yeah, thank you so much for giving us your view today.
And that concludes the public comment, Madam Chair.
All right.
And I would just ask if for some reason somebody wanted to make a public comment and was not able to due to technical reasons, would you mind just emailing us at sentencing.guidelines@state.mn.us? We'll try to work out any glitches at the next meeting, but I did want to do this process just to preserve people's privacy. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right. Okay, any other matters for today from the commission? Hearing none, then this meeting is adjourned. We'll see you in May.